My name is Ashley, and I live a peaceful, happy life with my husband, John. However, there's one problem, my sister-in-law, Rachel. My brother and Rachel have a daughter named Ida. Ida is 3 years old, and John and I love her. She's an adorable niece we enjoy spending time with. We don't mind watching her sometimes, but Rachel brings Ida over almost every week. Ashley, can you watch Ida again this week, please? She asks. Okay, I reply, and Ida happily runs from the doorway into our living room, where John is relaxing. I assume he'll keep an eye on her, but I decide to talk to Rachel about it. John and I really love Ida, but watching her every week is a bit overwhelming. Even though we work from home as freelancers, I'm an illustrator, and John is a programmer. It's hard to balance childcare and work when we're busy. As freelancers, we set our own schedules, but we still have deadlines, and watching Ida can be a big distraction. We can't let anything happen to her while she's with us, so I end up working on my tablet and keeping an eye on her at the same time. I felt bad bringing it up because I didn't want to cause issues between Rachel and my brother, but I couldn't take it anymore. I'm really sorry, Rachel, but could today be the last day we watch Ida? Rachel's face turned angry as I asked her, even though I tried to be polite. By the time I realized I'd made a mistake, it was too late. Rachel raised her eyebrows and snapped at me. You wouldn't understand, Ashley, since you don't have children. Raising kids is hard. You have no idea how difficult it's been to raise Ida so far. Stop complaining when you don't even have a child. Her words felt like knives to my heart. She didn't know that John and I had been trying to have children, but I have a condition that makes it extremely difficult for me to get pregnant. We went to a doctor and started fertility treatments, which are exhausting and expensive. Every month, we hope for good news, and every month we feel the stress and disappointment. Being blamed for not understanding because I don't have kids hit me deeply, especially given everything we're going through. But Rachel didn't stop there. Unlike you two, who just stay at home all the time, I'm a sociable person. I have friends who rely on me, and today I'm going to London to see one of them. I left Ida with you because I know you're home. You should appreciate the fact that I'm doing something for you too. With that, Rachel, dressed up and smelling of perfume, turned and left. I walked back into the living room, where John, who had overheard everything, was unusually angry. I didn't want to make a scene in front of Ida, so I stayed quiet, but that was harsh, he said. It's been about a month now since Rachel started bringing Ida over every week. I decided it was time to discuss things with my brother, Chris, so I gave him a call. Hello, Chris. Oh, hey, Ashley, it's been a while, how are you? I was already feeling annoyed from my recent argument with Rachel, so I replied a bit sharply. Hey, Chris, Ida is a sweetheart, but it's hard on us if she's here every week. John and I have deadlines to meet as freelancers, and a little consideration would help. He sounded confused. Ida? She's sleeping at home right now. What? That didn't make sense. He even sent me a picture of her sleeping, and it was clearly Ida, but younger than the child Rachel had been leaving with us. I sent him a photo of the girl who was with us now, playing with John, and Chris replied, "Who's that?" The last time I'd seen Ida with Chris, she was a baby who couldn't even walk. Suddenly, it hit me, this child Rachel brought over every week might not be Ida, but then why was Rachel bringing her? Chris and I were both confused. John, who'd been listening to the call, spoke up hesitantly. Chris, I'm sorry if this sounds rude, but, has Rachel been acting strange lately? John and I had talked about this before. After Rachel's parents passed away, she seemed different, and we stopped seeing her at family gatherings. The Rachel I remembered was modest in her style, but lately, she'd been dressing in bright colors and wearing flashy accessories. Chris seemed to have noticed this change, too, and responded with a dejected, "Yeah, I guess." He sighed and then said, "I might have an idea about what's going on. I'll call you back later." Then he hung up. John and I felt sorry for Chris, but couldn't help wondering if Rachel might be cheating on him. We didn't know for sure, though, and decided to leave that part to Chris. But what we could do was try to find out more about this little girl who'd been staying with us. Turning to her, I asked gently, "Ida, you're 3, right? Can you tell us your full name?" We'd assumed she was Ida and had never thought to ask. If she wasn't really Ida, we needed to know. With a cheerful smile, the girl replied, "I'm Ida Johnson. I'm 3 years old." John and I exchanged glances, trying to hide our shock. We smiled and praised her, saying, "You said that so well," all while feeling increasingly uneasy. I'd never heard of the last name Johnson in our family. So I realized we didn't know who this child really was or where she came from. Of course, it wasn't her fault, but something strange was definitely going on. Hoping to help my brother, I messaged him on WhatsApp to let him know that the girl staying with us called herself Ida Johnson. He replied briefly, "Got it, thanks." That afternoon, my brother showed up at our home with another person and asked, "Sorry to bother you, but I need to discuss something with Rachel when she comes to pick up Ida. Can we wait here?" I agreed, feeling a bit relieved. After everything Rachel had done, I didn't feel like forgiving her. Later, as evening turned into night, Rachel finally arrived, stumbling in, clearly drunk. "I'm here, Peter. I came to pick you up," she slurred. Not knowing what was about to unfold, I greeted Rachel with a forced smile. "Welcome home, Rachel. You seem really drunk. How about a glass of water?" Rachel smirked. "That'd be nice. Is this your way of apologizing for what you said this morning?" She walked into the living room, where Ida was happily sitting on the lap of a woman who was looking at Rachel sternly. Rachel looked at the woman with confusion and asked, "Who's that? Did you hire a babysitter?" The woman introduced herself. "Nice to meet you. I'm Katie Johnson, Ida's mother." Rachel was so shocked that she couldn't even take the glass of water. I'd never heard of anyone named Johnson in our family, so we had no idea where this little girl actually came from or who she was. Still, it was obvious that none of this was her fault. Hoping it might help, I messaged my brother to let him know the girl with us called herself Ida Johnson. He just replied, "Got it, thanks." That afternoon, my brother arrived at our house with someone else. He asked, "Sorry to bother you, but could we stay here until Rachel comes to pick up Ida? There's something I need to discuss with her." I was happy to help, especially since I felt betrayed by Rachel and wasn't in the mood to forgive her. As the evening turned into night, Rachel finally showed up, staggering into the house, clearly drunk. "I'm home," she slurred. "Peter, I came to pick you up." Unaware of what was about to happen, I put on a fake smile and greeted her. "Welcome, Rachel. You look pretty drunk. How about a glass of water?" She smirked and replied, "That would be nice. Is this your way of apologizing for the nonsense you said this morning?" When the cheerful Rachel entered the living room, she found Ida happily playing on the lap of a woman sitting there. Rachel stared at the woman, who was looking back at her sternly. "Who's that? Did you hire a babysitter?" Rachel asked, confused. The woman introduced herself calmly. "Nice to meet you. I'm Katie Johnson, Ida's mother." Rachel was so shocked she couldn't even take the glass of water. As I offered Rachel a hand, she stumbled backward, bumped into a corner, and fell over. I didn't move to help her up, watching as she lay sprawled on the floor. Then I heard my brother's voice from the doorway. "I brought him," Chris said, entering the house with a man who had bright, dyed hair. Rachel, still on the floor, looked shocked to see both Chris and this man. She turned pale, and the man went pale when he saw Katie, the real mother of the child we thought was Ida. Chris told Rachel and the man to sit down, and they nervously complied, sitting stiffly but looking around with anxious eyes. To keep the tension away from the child, John took the little girl, Ida, to another room. Once everyone was settled, Chris took charge, looking down at Rachel and the man with a serious expression. "I never imagined my own friend would cheat on me with my wife. Isn't that right, Noah?" Noah, who had been friends with Chris since high school, looked terrified. Chris, who had a rough reputation back in the day, was clearly angry. "Rachel. Noah. I can't believe it. And then you left your own child with my sister and her husband as if nothing was wrong. What's that about?" Noah, panicked, stammered in defense. "Rachel came to my salon. She started it. She told me she liked me and wanted to be with me." "Oh, so it's all my fault now?" Rachel snapped. "You were totally into it too." Chris had heard enough. "It doesn't matter who started it. The two of you should start by apologizing." They both tried to apologize, but Noah quickly shifted the blame. He pointed at Katie, who was now crying and visibly furious. "This is Katie's fault. She ignored me. I was lonely, so I cheated. Blame her, not me." Katie, who had been quiet and calm until now, exploded. "Don't you dare blame me. Do you have no self-control? I never imagined you'd leave Ida with strangers while I was at work. I'm so sorry for what you went through," she added, turning to me and John. Katie's anger seemed to unnerve both Noah and Rachel. Rachel tried to justify her actions, saying, "Well, Ashley and John don't have kids. They work from home and have plenty of time, so it was convenient for them." I couldn't hold back anymore. "Just because we don't have children doesn't mean we're here to take care of yours. And how dare you bring a stranger's child into our home under false pretenses? Rachel, trying to brush it off, said, "What's the big deal? I just thought I'd show you what having kids is like. You don't have any of your own anyway." Her words hit hard. "Rachel, you know we've been struggling to have children. You knew about our infertility treatments. It's infuriating that you'd say something like that and take advantage of us." I took a deep breath and continued, "You've been incredibly rude, bringing a stranger's child into our home, acting like we're just free babysitters. And let's be honest, you show up in ridiculous makeup, smelling of heavy perfume, and dressed like you're going to a party." Rachel and Noah sat in silence, finally realizing the hurt and chaos they'd caused. When I finally said everything I had been holding back, Rachel's face turned bright red. She knew she couldn't argue anymore, so she bit her lip and stayed silent. After that, Chris and Katie thoroughly scolded Rachel and Noah. Both couples ended up divorcing, and Rachel and Noah were required to pay hefty educational costs for their children. Chris also shared the story of Rachel and Noah's affair with friends back in Nebraska, and soon the rumor spread to Noah's local hair salon. Noah became the talk of the town, and as a result, he was fired from his job. Rachel, who had always been a housewife with no work experience, struggled to find a job. Since she'd been a stay-at-home wife since college, her job search was difficult. After her parents found out about her cheating, they disowned her, leaving her to scrape by doing odd jobs. In the end, both Rachel and Noah lost their jobs and families due to their affair and were left in a sad and lonely state. As for me, I received an incredible surprise. Our fertility treatments worked. I'm now pregnant, and we're expecting twins. John and I were overjoyed, shedding happy tears as we look forward to our baby's arrival. We still keep in touch with Katie and little Ida, and a special bond has grown between us. Ida and our niece love playing together, and they even touch my belly and say to the babies, "Let's play together once you're born." It's incredibly sweet. Though Chris and Katie were hurt by their partner's betrayal, they've committed to raising their children as single parents. John and I promise to support them however we can. Together, the four of us, John, Chris, Katie, and me, have become close, united in raising Ida, our niece, and the twins we're expecting. Through everything, we've formed a strong, supportive family bond. Growing up in our small town wasn't easy, especially in our modest two-story house where the dynamics were always complicated. I'm Molly, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who should love you most. My father worked long hours at the local mine. He was quiet, tired, and usually buried himself in the newspaper after dinner. My mother, on the other hand, was anything but quiet. She'd spend endless hours sprawled on our worn-out couch, phone pressed to her ear, cackling with her friends while some mindless talk show droned on in the background. "Linda, you won't believe what happened on The Real Housewives today," she'd squeal into the phone, completely ignoring the pile of unwashed dishes in the sink or the empty refrigerator that needed restocking. Then there was my younger brother, Riley. Mom's precious golden child. Even from my earliest memories, the difference in how she treated us was crystal clear. While I wore hand-me-downs and dollar store shoes, Riley got the latest gaming consoles and brand-name clothes. "Mom, my shoes are falling apart," I remember telling her one day when I was 12. "Could we maybe get new ones this weekend?" She barely looked up from her phone. "There's no money for shoes right now, Molly. Besides, those still look fine to me." But later that same week, I watched her return from the mall with a shopping bag full of new clothes for Riley. "Look what I got for my special boy," she cooed, while he eagerly dug through the bag. Dinner was always a testament to her negligence, microwaved frozen dinners or takeout containers scattered across our kitchen table. Sometimes, I'd stare at the sad, plastic-wrapped meals and dream about having a normal mom who actually cooked real food. By the time I reached high school, I knew college wasn't in my future. There were no savings, no college fund, not even discussions about higher education. The reality of our financial situation hit me hard when I overheard my parents arguing one night. "We can't keep living like this," my father's voice was strained. "The bills are piling up." "Well, what do you expect me to do about it?" Mom snapped back. "You're the one who should be making more money." That's when I made my decision. The day I turned 15, I walked into the cafe 3 blocks from our house and asked for a job. The manager, Mrs. Peterson, took one look at my determined face and gave me a chance as a part-time waitress. "You've got good instincts, kid," she told me after my first week. "Keep this up, and you'll go far." For the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself. But even that small victory was tainted by my mother's reaction. "A waitress?" she scoffed when I told her about my new job. "Well, I suppose someone has to do it. Just don't let it interfere with taking care of your brother's needs." After graduating high school, I landed a full-time waitressing position at Giovanni's, one of the nicer restaurants in town. My 3 years of experience at the cafe made me an attractive hire, and the manager didn't even hesitate when offering me the job. The salary was significantly better than what I'd been making at the cafe, but that wasn't even the best part. Mr. Romano had this amazing policy where servers could take home leftover food after their shifts. In a high-end Italian restaurant, these weren't just any leftovers. We're talking about gourmet pasta, premium steaks, and fresh-baked desserts that would otherwise go to waste. The first time I brought home a container of fettuccine alfredo and garlic bread, my family's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. I thought this might finally be something that would make them appreciate me. How wrong I was. It quickly became a pattern. I'd bring home these beautiful meals, carefully packed and still warm, only to find that by the time I got a chance to eat, there would be nothing but scraps left. Riley always got first pick, followed by Mom and Dad, and whatever remained, if anything, was supposed to be mine. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I came home with a magnificent portion of osso buco that the chef had specifically saved for me. By the time I finished changing out of my work clothes, I found Riley scraping the last bits from the container. "Hey," I protested. "I was going to eat that. Couldn't you have at least saved me some?" Mom's head snapped up from her phone. "Molly, how dare you be so selfish? You should be ashamed of yourself." "Selfish? I'm the one bringing this food home. You get to eat this fancy food all day at work," she snapped back. "Your brother only gets to enjoy it once a day. You should be grateful we're not asking you to bring more." I stood there, fighting back tears of frustration. "I don't eat at work, Mom. I'm too busy serving other people." "Well, that's your choice," she replied dismissively, already turning back to her phone. "Nobody's stopping you from eating there." Riley just smirked and licked his fork clean, not even bothering to hide his satisfaction. The worst part wasn't even the hunger, it was the realization that in their eyes, I would always be worth less than my brother, no matter what I contributed to the family. 2 years flew by, and Riley finally graduated high school. I remember sitting at his graduation ceremony, watching him receive his diploma, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, things would change now. Maybe he'd finally start contributing to the household like I had been doing since I was 15. "So, Riley," I asked him the day after graduation, while he was sprawled on the couch with his game controller, "have you started looking for jobs yet?" He barely glanced away from his video game. "Nah, I'm taking a gap year. Need some time to figure out what I want to do with my life, you know?" "A gap year?" I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. "But we can barely make ends meet as it is." "Oh, honey," Mom chimed in from her usual spot on the recliner, "Riley's still too young to work. He needs time to find his path." I wanted to scream. Too young? He was the same age I was when I started working full-time. But instead, I took a deep breath and tried to reason with them. "Mom, I started working when I was 15. Riley's 18 now." That was different, Mom waved her hand dismissively. "You wanted to work. Riley needs to focus on his future." And so began Riley's gap year. Every day, I'd leave for my morning shift at the restaurant, and he'd still be asleep. When I'd return in the evening, he'd either be in his room playing video games or out with his friends, the house just as messy as I'd left it. The dishes would pile up in the sink, the trash would overflow, and heaven forbid anyone ask him to help with laundry. I couldn't take it anymore. "Why doesn't he have to work?" I confronted my parents one evening during dinner. Everyone else his age has a job. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair while Mom immediately went on the defensive. Stop attacking your brother. You don't understand how hard it is for him. The job market is terrible right now, and he's suffering enough without you making him feel worse. I tried a different approach. Look, we actually need delivery drivers at the restaurant. I could put in a good word for him. It's a decent starting salary, plus tips. Riley chose that moment to emerge from his cave, presumably for his evening beer run with friends. A delivery driver? He scoffed, grabbing his keys from the counter. I didn't get straight A's to become some delivery boy, Molly. I know my worth. And what exactly do you think you're worth right now? I muttered under my breath. He paused at the door, turning to face me with that smug expression I'd grown to despise. Unlike some people, I have standards. When I get a job, it'll be something worthy of my abilities. Something with a future. Not everyone wants to be a waitress their whole life. The way he said waitress, like it was something dirty, made my blood boil. But before I could respond, he was gone, the screen door slamming behind him. It was Riley's 19th birthday when I finally understood just how deep my family's favoritism ran. That morning, I was getting ready for work when I heard excited voices from outside. Curious, I looked out my window to see my parents presenting Riley with a car. Yes, a car. It wasn't new, a used Honda Civic with some scratches and dents, but it was still a functioning vehicle. I stood there, frozen, watching Riley jump around like a kid at Christmas while Mom took pictures with her phone. I thought about the bus I'd be catching in 30 minutes, the same bus I'd been taking to work for years, rain or shine. The same bus where I'd often stand for the entire 40-minute ride after a grueling 8-hour shift on my feet. Do you like it, sweetie? Mom's voice drifted up to my window. We know it's not brand new, but it's perfect for getting around town. This is awesome, Riley exclaimed, already sitting in the driver's seat. I can't wait to show the guys. I didn't say anything before leaving for work. What could I say? That I'd been working for years and couldn't afford a car while my unemployed brother just got one handed to him? That I was tired of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family? But the real surprise came that evening during my shift at Giovanni's. I was serving a table near the window when I saw them walk in, my entire family, dressed in their best clothes, with Riley leading the way like he owned the place. Molly, Mom waved me over dramatically. We're here to celebrate Riley's birthday properly. My brother grinned at me. We want the best table in the banquet hall. My friends Mike and Dave will be here in half an hour. And we want you to be our server, Mom added. Only you. We don't trust anyone else to make this special evening perfect. I wanted to tell them I already had tables assigned in my section, that the banquet hall was typically reserved in advance, that I couldn't just abandon my other customers. But Mr. Romano overheard and, trying to be helpful, rearranged things to accommodate them. What followed was 3 hours of pure humiliation. I served them course after course while they made endless jokes at my expense. Hey, sis, the water's a bit warm. Don't they teach you proper serving temperature in waitress school? Riley snickered. Molly, dear, you missed a spot when you wiped the table. Maybe that's why you're still just a server, Mom chimed in, while his friends laughed. By the time they finished their elaborate meal, complete with expensive wines and multiple courses, I was exhausted and emotionally drained. But the worst was yet to come. As they gathered their coats, Mom pulled me aside with that fake sweet smile I'd grown to dread. Darling, there's just one tiny thing, she said, lowering her voice. We're a bit short on cash right now. You'll need to cover the bill. Consider it your gift to your brother for his birthday. I stared at the bill in my hand, $247.83. Nearly half my weekly salary. You can't be serious, I whispered. You came here knowing you couldn't pay? Don't be dramatic, Molly, she hissed. It's your brother's birthday. Surely you want to do something nice for him? Besides, you get an employee discount, don't you? They all stood there, watching me, Riley twirling his new car keys, while Mom gave me that expectant look that said I had no choice. And she was right, I couldn't let them walk out without paying. It would cost me my job. 6 months after Riley's extravagant birthday celebration, my own birthday rolled around. That morning, Mom was unusually chipper. "Don't make any plans for tonight, sweetie," she sang out as I headed to work. "We have a special surprise waiting for you when you get home." For the first time in years, I actually felt hopeful. Maybe they'd finally realized how unfairly they'd been treating me. Maybe they'd finally show me the same kind of appreciation they showed Riley. I spent my entire shift daydreaming about what might be waiting for me, maybe a nice family dinner, perhaps even something special they'd saved up for. I practically rushed home after my shift ended, my heart beating faster as I opened the front door. But what I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. There stood my family, dressed to the nines, Mom in a brand new designer dress that must have cost at least $400, matching shoes that I recognized from the expensive boutique downtown, and Dad and Riley in crisp new suits that definitely weren't from the discount store. "Happy birthday," they chorused, but all I could see was the money they were wearing, my money. "Here's your gift, sis," Riley smirked, tossing a small package at me. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a perfume box. But something was off. The designer name was misspelled, Gucci, instead of Gucci. The label was crooked, clearly stuck on by hand, and when I sprayed a tiny bit, the chemical smell was so overwhelming it made my eyes water. That was the moment something inside me snapped. "Are you kidding me?" My voice started low, but quickly rose to a shout. "Molly," Mom looked shocked. "Don't be ungrateful." "Ungrateful?" I was screaming now, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. "I pay all the bills in this house. I buy the groceries. I give you expensive gifts for every holiday." "Keep your voice down," Dad muttered, but I was beyond stopping. "You bought Riley a car with my money. I'm still paying for his gas, and he won't even give me a ride to work. I've asked him 3 times, and each time he said he was too busy playing video games." Riley shifted uncomfortably. "It's not my fault you can't afford your own car. Because I spend all my money on this family." I grabbed at my hair in frustration. "And what do I get for my birthday? Fake perfume that smells like paint thinner while you're all standing there in clothes that cost more than I make in 2 weeks. You're being hysterical," Mom snapped. "This is no way to act on your birthday." "Hysterical? You want to see hysterical?" I snatched up the perfume bottle. "This isn't even real. You couldn't even be bothered to get me something that wasn't a cheap knockoff." "That's enough," Dad's voice boomed. "If you're going to act like this, you can just go to your room and stay there." "Yes," Mom added, smoothing her expensive dress. "Go celebrate alone until you can behave properly and show some gratitude." I turned and walked to my room without another word, but this time was different. This time I wasn't going to cry. This time I was going to plan. Because in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I needed to get out of this house. Just a week after my disastrous birthday, Mr. Romano called me into his office. I was nervous at first, wondering if my family's behavior during Riley's birthday dinner had finally caught up with me. "Molly," he said, gesturing for me to sit down, "I've been watching your work here for a long time. You're reliable, professional, and our customers love you. How would you feel about becoming our new receptionist? The position comes with a significant pay raise, of course. What do you say?" I nearly cried right there in his office. Yes, absolutely yes. That very afternoon, during my break, I started searching for apartments. With my new salary, I could finally afford to live on my own. It felt like the universe was finally giving me a chance to escape. By some miracle, I found a small 1-bedroom apartment just 3 blocks from the restaurant. It wasn't fancy, just a basic kitchen, living room, and bedroom, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was away from my family. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, took one look at my proof of employment from Giovanni's and approved me on the spot. "You seem like a responsible young lady," she said as I signed the lease. When would you like to move in? Tomorrow, if possible, I replied, my hands shaking with excitement as I wrote the check for the deposit. That evening at dinner, while Mom was serving her usual microwaved meals, I decided to drop my bomb. I'm moving out tomorrow, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've found an apartment near work. Mom's face turned an alarming shade of red. How dare you? How are we supposed to pay our bills? Have you even thought about that? You're being completely selfish. I took a deep breath. Dad has a job. And Riley's perfectly capable of working. Maybe it's time he started contributing. I have devoted my entire life to you children. Mom was in full meltdown mode now, tears streaming down her face. And this is how you repay me? By abandoning your family when we need you most? Riley just sat there, shoving food in his mouth and watching the show like it was another one of his video games. Dad stared at his plate, silent as always. I've heard enough, I said, standing up from the table. I'm leaving tomorrow, and that's final. You ungrateful little, Mom's voice followed me up the stairs, but I tuned it out. I spent the next hour packing my belongings into the few boxes and bags I'd secretly bought over the past week. It wasn't much, some clothes, a few books, my laptop, and the small amount of jewelry I owned. My whole life fit into 4 boxes and 2 duffel bags. When the taxi arrived, I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out the front door, to the sound of Mom's continued screaming about family loyalty and ungrateful children. As the taxi pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of our house in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The first month in my new apartment was pure bliss. No drama, no guilt trips, no watching Riley being waited on hand and foot. Just peace and quiet. I could cook what I wanted, watch what I wanted, and most importantly, spend my money how I wanted. Then came the phone call. Molly, Mom's voice was sharp even through the phone. The utility bills are due. I took a deep breath. Mom, I don't live there anymore. I'm not responsible for those bills. We were counting on that money, she screeched. You have an obligation to help your family. No, Mom, I don't. Riley's had a whole month to find a job. He can help now. Your brother can't find work right now. And he needs money, he crashed the car last week and needs repairs. He can't work without a car. I almost laughed at the irony. So he crashed the car you bought with my money, and now you want more of my money to fix it? Not happening. This isn't my problem anymore. The next 6 months were transformative. Without having to support my entire family, I was finally able to save money. I bought myself a used Toyota, nothing fancy, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. No strings attached, no guilt, no obligations. I felt like I could finally breathe. Then one evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my parents standing there. My stomach dropped, I had never told them my address. We need to talk, Mom said, pushing past me into my apartment. Dad followed, looking uncomfortable as usual. We need money, Molly. Your father's about to be laid off, and Riley still hasn't found work. You have to help us. No, I said firmly. I don't have to do anything. We're your family. Mom's voice was rising. You can't just abandon us. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just not enabling you anymore. Dad finally spoke up. The mine's cutting back workers. I might not have a job by next month. Then Riley needs to step up, I replied. He's had plenty of time to find work. Fine, Mom's face twisted into something ugly. If that's how you want to play it, then you'll have problems too. My mother's threat wasn't empty. The very next morning, I woke up to Mrs. Chen frantically banging on my door. Molly, your car. Someone set it on fire. I ran outside in my pajamas to find my Toyota, my pride and joy that I'd worked so hard for, reduced to a smoking shell in the parking lot. My legs nearly gave out, but then Mrs. Chen grabbed my arm. I have cameras, she said quickly. The police are on their way. We caught everything on video. The footage was crystal clear. There was Riley, at 3 a.m., pouring something over my car and lighting a match. He hadn't noticed the security cameras tucked away in the building's eaves, hadn't even thought to look for them. He just did his work quickly and walked away as my car went up in flames, probably thinking he'd never be caught. The police arrested him within hours. My phone started ringing almost immediately. "You have to drop the charges." Mom was hysterical. "He's your brother. You can't let them take him to jail." "Actually, I can," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "But I'll make you a deal, reimburse me for the car, and I'll withdraw my statement." "We don't have that kind of money." "You know that." Then Riley can face the consequences of his actions. For once in his life. "You heartless little," I hung up before she could finish. The trial was quick. The evidence was undeniable, and Riley had priors I hadn't even known about. Apparently, he'd been in trouble for vandalism before, but my parents had always managed to sweep it under the rug. This time, there was no sweeping. He got 3 years and was ordered to pay restitution equal to the value of my car. My parents eventually took out a loan to pay me back, probably hoping I'd drop the charges if they did. But it was too late. Riley had already been sentenced. He served 1.5 years before getting out on good behavior, though I only heard this through distant relatives who occasionally update me on family gossip. They tell me my parents still live in the same house, struggling more than ever. Dad's health is failing, but he keeps working at the mine because he has to. Mom spends her days lamenting about her poor boy whose life was ruined by his sister. Riley, unsurprisingly, still doesn't have a job. Turns out having an arson conviction makes it even harder to find that prestigious position he always thought he deserved. Sometimes, friends ask me if I feel guilty. If maybe I was too harsh. They ask if I ever think about reaching out, trying to mend fences. Would you give a second chance to someone who tried to destroy everything you worked for? I ask them back. Would you trust people who watched you struggle for years while they spoiled someone else? The truth is, I don't regret any of it. My family made their choices, years and years of choices, and now they're living with the consequences. They chose to enable Riley's laziness and entitlement. They chose to treat me like their personal ATM. They chose to threaten me when I stopped playing along. And finally, Riley chose to commit a crime, thinking he'd get away with it like he got away with everything else. I'm done feeling guilty about their choices. These days, my life is peaceful. I still live in the same apartment. Mrs. Chen actually reduced my rent after the incident, saying she'd never had such a good tenant. I'm still working at Giovanni's, but now I'm the head receptionist. I've been saving money again. Not for another car, though I did eventually get one, with better insurance this time, but for something bigger. Next fall, I'm starting college, part-time at first, but it's a start. I'm going to study business management. Maybe someday I'll open my own restaurant. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when my life split into before and after. I was 16 when my parents sat me down in our small living room and told me they were getting divorced. No drama, no screaming matches, just two people who'd fallen out of love and wanted different things in life. I remember being surprisingly okay with it. Maybe because they handled it so maturely, or maybe because I'd seen it coming in the small ways, fewer family dinners, parallel lives under one roof. Dad moved into a nice apartment across town, and I spent every other weekend with him. We'd order pizza and watch bad sci-fi movies, just like we always had. But then Mom met Robert. Just a year after the divorce, she came home practically floating. "Lucy, I've met someone special," she announced over breakfast. "He's got a daughter about 10 years old. Wouldn't it be nice to have a sister?" I forced a smile and pushed my cereal around the bowl. "Great, Mom. Really great." Within months, they were married, and Robert and his daughter Sarah moved into our house. That's when the trouble started. Sarah, with her designer clothes and perfect little girl curls, looked like an angel in front of the adults. But the moment they turned away, she was a different person. It started small, my favorite sweater somehow ending up in the washing machine with red socks, my homework mysteriously getting coffee stains. Robert wasn't much better. He'd make little comments, always just on the edge of rude. "Lucy, don't you think that skirt's a bit short for school?" he'd say, or "maybe if you spent less time on the phone and more time studying, your grades would be better." I tried to tell Mom, but she'd just say, "He's just protective, honey. He wants what's best for you." Then came the research project incident. I'd spent weeks working on it, interviews, data collection, everything. I came home from school early one day and found Sarah in my room, her hands stained green from the markers she'd used to destroy my work. Pages and pages of research, ruined. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, grabbing her by the collar of her expensive little cardigan. "Nothing," she squealed, but the evidence was all over her hands. I dragged her downstairs to where Mom and Robert were watching TV. "Look at her hands," I shouted, pointing at the green stains. "Look what she did to my research project." Robert jumped up, his face turning red. "Get your hands off my daughter. She destroyed my work. Weeks of work." "You little fool," Robert snarled, stepping toward me. "How dare you manhandle my Sarah? She's just a child." I looked at Mom, waiting for her to defend me, to say something, anything. But she just sat there, shaking her head disapprovingly. At me. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Mom's silence over and over in my head. By morning, I'd made my decision. I started packing before sunrise, throwing clothes and books into bags, not even caring if they were folded. Dad picked up on the first ring. "Lucy, what's wrong? Can I come live with you?" My voice cracked. "Please?" "Of course, sweetheart. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Dad's truck pulled up, Robert was already at work, and Sarah was at school. Mom stood in the doorway, watching me load my bags. "Lucy, don't do this," she said. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I turned to face her. "Your husband called me a fool, and you just sat there. Your stepdaughter destroyed my work, and you did nothing." Dad must have heard, because his face darkened. "What's this about Robert calling my daughter names?" After I told him everything, he was livid. He marched straight to Robert's workplace. I stayed in the truck, but I could see them through the window of Robert's office, Dad pointing, Robert standing up, faces red, fingers jabbing. Security had to separate them before punches were thrown. Living with Dad was like breathing fresh air after being underwater. No more walking on eggshells, no more checking my room for sabotage. He helped me redo my research project, staying up late with me, bringing me coffee and snacks. Mom sent me a message a few days later. "I can't believe you set your father against Robert like this. You're tearing this family apart." I didn't bother responding. What family was she talking about? The one where her husband verbally abused me? Where her stepdaughter destroyed my things? I focused instead on finishing my senior year strong. When graduation came around, Dad and Grandma sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. Mom was there too, with Robert and Sarah, but I barely glanced their way when I walked across the stage. "We're so proud of you, sweetie," Grandma said afterward, hugging me tight. "And we've got a surprise. Your father and I have been saving for your college fund." They'd saved enough to cover my tuition at the local college. I moved into the dorms that fall, ready for a fresh start. A few months into my sophomore year, Mom reached out on social media. "I'm sorry about everything that happened. Can we talk?" I agreed to meet her at a cafe near campus. It was awkward at first, both of us stirring our coffee too long, avoiding eye contact. "Sarah's starting to look at colleges," she said. "And Robert just got a new car." "That's nice," I said, then quickly changed the subject. "My psychology professor thinks I should consider grad school." We fell into a routine after that, monthly coffee meetings where we talked about safe topics, the weather, my classes, her work. She'd try to slip in mentions of Robert and Sarah, but I'd steer the conversation away. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. After graduation, I landed a job at Marshall & Associates as a junior project manager. Dad was thrilled and immediately offered me a place at his apartment. "You could save money, Lucy," he said over dinner. "No need to rush into renting." I shook my head, pushing my pasta around the plate. "Thanks, Dad, but I need to do this on my own. I found a small place near work. It's time for me to stand on my own 2 feet." The apartment I rented wasn't much, but it was mine. The first night I spent there, sitting on my second-hand couch with takeout Chinese food, I felt more grown-up than ever before. Every month, I put aside a chunk of my paycheck into my future house fund. While my coworkers went out for expensive lunches, I brought sandwiches from home. When they hit the bars after work, I stayed late, tackling the projects nobody else wanted. "Parker, the client's impossible," my colleague Jake warned when I volunteered for the Riverside account. "They've gone through 3 project managers already." I just smiled. "Watch me." 3 months later, the Riverside project was completed ahead of schedule. My boss called me into his office, looking impressed. "Lucy, I've got to say, you've exceeded all expectations," he said, sliding a bonus check across his desk. "Keep this up, and you're going places in this company." The quarterly bonuses started rolling in, and they weren't small. Every cent went straight into my savings account. My coworkers thought I was crazy, passing up happy hours and weekend trips. "You're wasting your youth," Mom said during one of our coffee meetings 2 years later. "You should enjoy life a little." "I am enjoying life," I replied. "I'm building my future." She stirred her coffee absently. "Sarah's joining a sorority at her college. Having the time of her life." I changed the subject. "The weather's been nice lately." The only times I couldn't avoid Robert and Sarah were at family gatherings, Thanksgiving at Aunt Paula's, Christmas at Uncle Mike's. I'd walk in, hug Mom, and pretend they didn't exist. Sarah, now in college herself, shoot me smug looks. She'd grown taller, more polished, but that mean streak was still there, just better hidden. Robert would stand with his arms crossed, looking down his nose at me. Still at that entry-level job, he'd say loud enough for others to hear, even though he knew I'd been promoted twice already. During last Thanksgiving, I was helping Aunt Paula in the kitchen when Mom cornered me by the refrigerator. "Lucy, don't you think this has gone on long enough?" she sighed. "Sarah's grown up now," Robert's mellowed. "Can't we just be a family?" I closed the fridge door harder than necessary. "We're not a family, Mom. We're people who happen to be connected by your marriage." "That's it." "You're being childish," she said, shaking her head. "People grow, people change." "Yeah, they do," I replied, looking her straight in the eye. "I've grown enough to know I don't need toxic people in my life, even if they're technically family." She opened her mouth to argue, then just shook her head and walked away. Same old Mom, always choosing the path of least resistance, always walking away from confrontation. But every snide comment from Robert, every smug look from Sarah just reinforced that I'd made the right choice in keeping my distance. The day I turned 28, I signed the final papers on my house. After years of saving and working overtime, I'd managed to put down 60% of the total cost. The mortgage payments wouldn't keep me up at night. "Congratulations, Ms. Parker," the realtor said, handing me the keys. "It's a beautiful property." Standing in my empty living room that first day, I felt like I could finally breathe. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with granite countertops, and a backyard where I could plant a garden. All mine. I planned a housewarming party, sending invitations to family and close friends. Dad and Grandma couldn't make it, they'd recently moved to Hawaii for Dad's retirement. When I called Mom to invite her, I was specific. "I'd love for you to come, Mom." "Just you?" She hesitated. "Lucy, that's not fair to Robert and Sarah." "Mom, it's my house. My rules. She agreed, but I should have known better. The day of the party, I opened the door to find Mom standing there with Robert and Sarah in tow. "Surprise," Mom said weakly, noting my expression. I bit my tongue and let them in. Robert's eyes scanned everything, his lips curling slightly as he took in the crown molding, the hardwood floors. "It's nice," he said, making it sound like anything but. Sarah, now 22 and dressed like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, wandered around with her nose in the air. "The kitchen's kind of small, isn't it?" I was showing my colleague Jake the back patio when I overheard Sarah talking to Mom and Robert in the living room. "Daddy, I've been looking at houses too," she said loudly enough to carry. "I'm going to get one much bigger than this. With a pool." I couldn't help myself. I walked back inside. "Really? That's interesting. What job are you planning to buy it with?" Sarah's face flushed. "I have prospects." "Prospects aren't paychecks," I said. "And last I heard, you were still living off your dad's credit card." Robert's face turned that familiar shade of purple. "How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" I cut him off. "You show up uninvited to my house and then stand there insulting it?" "Lucy," Mom grabbed Robert's arm as he took a step forward. "Come on, Robert, Sarah. We're leaving." I watched them hurry out, Mom shooting me an apologetic look over her shoulder. The door closed behind them, and the party continued. 3 months after the housewarming disaster, my boss called me into his office with an opportunity one couldn't refuse, leading a major project in Boston. It would mean several months away, but it could fast-track my career to senior management. My biggest concern was my house, particularly my indoor garden. I'd spent months cultivating my collection of plants, delicate orchids, temperamental peace lilies, and my pride and joy, a rare bird of paradise that had just started to bloom. Each one needed specific care, and I couldn't bear the thought of returning to dead plants. After considering my options, I swallowed my pride and drove to Mom's house. We hadn't spoken much since the housewarming incident, but I knew she had a green thumb. Thankfully, she was alone when I arrived. "Lucy," she seemed surprised to see me on her doorstep. "Is everything okay?" "I need a favor," I said, following her into the kitchen. "I'm going to Boston for a few months for work. Could you look after my house?" "Mainly the plants, they need regular watering and care." Mom's face lit up. "Of course, you know how much I love gardening." I handed her the spare keys, along with detailed care instructions for each plant. The next few months were intense, but rewarding. 16-hour days, working with teams across multiple time zones, but the project was going well. I called Mom every week to check on things. "Everything's fine," she'd say. "Your plants are thriving, don't worry so much. Just focus on your work." I should have noticed how she always seemed to be at my house when I called, no matter what time it was. I should have picked up on the background noises, dishes clinking, TV sounds, things that shouldn't have been there if she was just stopping by to water plants. But I was too absorbed in my work to notice these red flags. Finally, after 4 months, the project wrapped up successfully. I caught a late flight home, exhausted but proud of what I'd accomplished. The Uber dropped me off at my house just after midnight. All I could think about was a hot shower and my own bed. I inserted my key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, more carefully this time. Still nothing. The key that had worked perfectly for months suddenly didn't fit. "What the hell?" I muttered, trying again. That's when I heard it, footsteps inside my house. My house. Moving around like they belonged there. My heart started racing as I pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over 911. Before I could dial, the door swung open. And there, standing in my doorway, wearing pajamas like she owned the place, was Sarah. Her blonde hair was pulled up in a messy bun, and she had the audacity to look annoyed at my presence. "What are you doing here?" The words came out in a whisper, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. "What am I doing here?" Sarah's smile was smug. Living, of course. Been here for weeks now. Daddy helped me move in while you were gone playing big shot businesswoman in Boston. I stood there, my suitcase still in hand, trying to process her words. The exhaustion from my flight disappeared, replaced by a surge of anger. This is my house, I said through gritted teeth. Get out, now. Sarah leaned against my doorframe, and examined her manicured nails. Yeah, that's not happening. I'm quite comfortable here. The master bathroom has amazing water pressure, by the way. Get out of my house. Each word was sharp enough to cut. Sarah's response was to laugh, actually laugh, and slam the door in my face. I heard the lock click, followed by her footsteps walking away. I stood there on my own front porch, surrounded by my luggage, trembling with rage. The garden lights I'd installed illuminated the flower beds I'd so carefully planned. Through the window, I could see my living room, but it wasn't my living room anymore. Sarah's jacket was thrown over my couch, her shoes scattered on my hardwood floors. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and called Mom. She picked up on the third ring, sounding groggy. Lucy, what's wrong? What's wrong? I almost screamed. I just got home to find Sarah living in my house. She says she's been here for weeks. Tell her to get out right now, or I'm calling the police. No, don't call the police. Mom's voice went from sleepy to panicked. We're coming over. Just wait there. Where else am I supposed to go? I snapped. I'm locked out of my own house. The next 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I paced back and forth on my front porch, watching lights come on in neighboring houses. What must they think, seeing me out here in the middle of the night? A few cars drove by slowly, probably wondering if they should call the police themselves. Finally, Mom's car pulled up, Robert behind the wheel. They rushed out, both still in their pajamas under their coats. What is going on? I demanded, confronting Mom. Why does Sarah have keys to my house? Why are you letting her live here? Mom at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Lucy, honey, Sarah needed a place to stay. Her lease was up, and she couldn't afford the rent increase. Your house was just sitting empty. Just sitting empty? It's my house. You had no right. The girl needed somewhere to live, Mom said, as if that explained everything. Your house is too big for just one person anyway. We thought. We? I cut her off. There is no we when it comes to my house. You were supposed to water my plants, not move your stepdaughter in. I watched my mother's face, waiting for some sign of understanding, some acknowledgement of how completely she had betrayed my trust. Instead, she just stood there, making excuses for the inexcusable. Robert stepped forward, his chest puffed out like it had been when I was 16. Look, there was no point telling you about Sarah moving in. You would have just said no. Of course I would have said no. I was almost screaming now. It's my house. And now I can't go in there. The locks needed changing anyway, he said, waving his hand dismissively. They were old. I did you a favor. I stared at him in disbelief. You do realize that's illegal, right? You can't just change the locks on someone else's property. Legal, illegal, he scoffed. It's done now. Sarah needs a place to stay, and this house is too big for just you. Get her out, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Get her out right now, or I'm calling the police. Robert's face twisted into that familiar smirk, the one he'd worn when I was a teenager, the one that said he knew he'd win. You won't do that. Lucy, Mom stepped forward, wringing her hands. If you call the police, that's it. I won't speak to you again. Is that what you want? To destroy this family completely? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. This family? You mean the one where you let your husband illegally take over my house? That family? Instead of responding, they turned and walked into my house, leaving me standing there with my luggage. The door closed behind them with a definitive click. My hands weren't shaking anymore as I pulled out my phone. No more hesitation. No more trying to keep the peace. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report an illegal occupancy. Someone's changed the locks on my house and moved in without my permission. 20 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing. The neighbors were definitely awake now, watching from behind their curtains as I explained the situation to Officers Martinez and Chen. "You're the legal owner?" Officer Martinez asked. I pulled up the property records on my phone. "Yes, I have all the documentation. I've been away on business, and I gave my mother a key to water my plants. Instead, they moved my stepsister in and changed all the locks." Officer Chen rang the doorbell. There was a long pause, shuffling sounds from inside. Finally, the door opened. Mom, Robert, and Sarah stood there, trying to look confident but failing. "Good evening," Officer Martinez said. "We need to see some identification and proof of residency from everyone." "There's been a misunderstanding," Robert said, his voice oily smooth. "Lucy gave permission for Sarah to stay here. They had a falling out, and now she's trying to cause trouble." "That's a lie," I cut in. "I never gave permission. They took advantage while I was away on business. Ask them about the locks, they'll admit they changed them without my knowledge." "The old locks were faulty," Robert started. "So you acknowledge changing the locks without the homeowner's permission?" Officer Chen interrupted, making notes. Sarah stepped forward, her earlier smugness replaced by fear. "Daddy said it would be okay. He said Lucy wouldn't mind once she got used to the idea." "Sir, changing locks on someone else's property and occupying their home without permission constitutes illegal entry," Officer Martinez said, looking directly at Robert. "We're going to have to take you and your daughter to the station." I watched in silence as the officers led them to the patrol car. Sarah looked smaller somehow, younger, like that 10-year-old girl who'd first walked into my life. Robert's face was purple with rage, but for once, he kept his mouth shut. Mom stood on the porch, trembling. As the patrol car pulled away, she turned to me with such hatred in her eyes that I almost took a step back. "From this day forward," she said, her voice shaking, "you are no longer my daughter. How could you do this to your own family?" I felt strangely calm as I looked at her, this woman who had chosen everyone else over me for the past 12 years. "Mom," I said quietly, "you made it clear a long time ago that they were your real family. The day Sarah destroyed my research and you sat there in silence. The day Robert called me names and you looked away. Every time you asked me to be the bigger person while they treated me like dirt. You chose them. Over and over and over again." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Without another word, she walked to her car and drove away. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my living room, surrounded by Sarah's things, designer clothes thrown over my furniture, her photos stuck to my fridge, her toiletries cluttering my bathroom. In the morning, I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house changed. The police called later that day. They wanted to know if I would press charges. "No," I said after a long pause. "Just make sure they understand they're not allowed on my property again." I hired a cleaning service to pack up Sarah's belongings and had them delivered to Mom's house. Then I spent a weekend cleaning every inch of my home, erasing all traces of their presence. Most of my plants had died from neglect, even the bird of paradise was brown and withered. I threw them all out and started fresh. That was 3 months ago. Mom tried calling once, but I didn't pick up. Robert sent a threatening email about suing me for Sarah's emotional distress, which I forwarded to my lawyer without responding. Sarah posted some vague social media rants about toxic people who pretend to be victims, but I blocked her accounts. Last week, I ran into Aunt Paula at the grocery store. She tried to tell me that Mom was struggling with our estrangement, that I should reach out, try to make peace. Some bridges, I told her, need to stay burned. I'm sleeping better these days. My new plants are thriving in the sunlight that streams through my windows. Dad and Grandma call regularly from Hawaii, and I'm planning to visit them next month. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for the phone to call Mom, out of habit more than anything else. But then I remember that night on my porch, locked out of my own home, and the urge passes. My name is Ruby, and I came into this world as an apparent afterthought, 12 years after my eldest sister Sarah and 10 years after Emma. By the time I was forming my first coherent memories, they were already deep into their teenage years, more interested in boys and makeup than playing with their baby sister. Our house in suburban Minnesota was always filled with the echoes of my parents' pride in their older daughters. Sarah got straight A's again, they'd beam at dinner. Emma made the cheerleading squad, they'd announce to anyone who'd listen. I'd sit there, pushing peas around my plate, feeling like a shadow in my own home. I remember the day Sarah brought home her first boyfriend at 16. I was just 4, peeking through the banister rails as this tall boy with spiky hair nervously shook hands with our dad. Emma wasn't far behind, starting to date at 15. They were both so beautiful, so confident, so everything I wasn't yet. "Ruby, finish your homework," Mom would say, barely glancing my way as she helped Sarah pick out prom dresses or discussed college applications with Emma. I learned early on to be self-sufficient, to do my own thing, to not need the attention that seemed permanently focused on my sister's achievements. "Did you hear?" Mom burst into the kitchen one morning when I was 7. Sarah got accepted to Northwestern. The news was followed by celebratory pancakes, while I sat in my usual spot, invisible as always. Emma left for college 2 years later, and suddenly, I was alone in a house that felt both too empty and too full of their lingering presence. Their rooms became shrines to their past lives, trophies, photos, and memories preserved exactly as they'd left them. Meanwhile, I carved out my own space, learned to find comfort in solitude, and tried not to mind when every conversation somehow circled back to my amazing older sisters. The real turning point came when I was 15. Sarah, now married and living across town, gave birth to her first child, a boy named Tyler. I still remember the day she brought him home from the hospital, everyone cooing and crying, my parents practically floating with joy at becoming grandparents. "You'll be such a wonderful aunt," Mom said, squeezing my shoulder. Looking back now, I realize that was the moment everything started to shift, though I couldn't have known it then. At first, I was genuinely excited about being an aunt. Tyler was adorable, and I loved making silly faces at him while Sarah and Mom chatted over coffee. But that dynamic shifted faster than I could have imagined. It started with what seemed like an innocent request one Saturday morning. "Ruby, could you watch Tyler for a couple hours? I really need to do some shopping," Sarah asked, already putting her purse over her shoulder. Before I could even respond, she'd placed Tyler in my arms and was heading for the door. "Thanks, sis. You're the best." That became the new normal. Every weekend, Sarah would show up at our parents' house, hand over Tyler, and disappear for hours. Sometimes it was shopping, other times it was lunch with friends or a spa day, always under the guise of needing a break from motherhood. "It's not fair," I complained to Mom one day after Sarah had been gone for 5 hours. "I had plans to meet Jenny at the mall today." Mom barely looked up from her magazine. "Family helps family, Ruby. Your sister needs this time to herself. You'll understand when you're a mother." I was 16 when Emma announced she was pregnant. "It's a girl," she squealed at the family dinner. While everyone celebrated, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Sure enough, when little Sophie arrived, history repeated itself with a vengeance. Now my weekends were a circus of managing a 3-year-old Tyler and baby Sophie. Try helping a toddler build block towers while trying to keep a crying infant calm. It's not as fun as it sounds. And homework? Forget about it until they were both napping, if they ever napped at the same time. "Jason asked me to the movies tonight," I told Dad one Saturday, while bouncing Sophie on my hip and watching Tyler color on our coffee table instead of his coloring book. "Well, you should have thought about that before agreeing to watch the kids," he replied. I never agreed. "Nobody ever asks me." The frustration in my voice made Sophie start crying. "Lower your voice, you're upsetting the baby," Mom scolded from the kitchen. "And stop being selfish." Your sisters need this support. I started spending my free time in the school library, researching colleges. Not just any colleges, ones far away from home. I threw myself into studying, knowing good grades were my ticket out. Every A on my report card was one step closer to freedom. When my acceptance letter from Berkeley arrived, including a partial scholarship, I felt like I could finally breathe. But my family had other plans. The community college here has a great business program, Sarah suggested during what they called a family council, but I called an intervention. You could live at home and save money. And help with the kids, Emma added brightly, as if that was a selling point. I looked around our living room at their expectant faces, Mom, Dad, Sarah, Emma, and Grandma Rose, who'd been unusually quiet throughout the discussion. Actually, Grandma Rose's voice cut through the tension like a knife. I think Berkeley is perfect for Ruby. Everyone turned to stare at her. That program is exactly what she needs for her future career. And your grandfather's education fund will help cover what the scholarship doesn't. I could have hugged her right then. The family council ended with my parents and sisters shooting disappointed looks my way, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt like I could see my future clearly, and it didn't involve being everyone's free babysitter. College life was everything I'd dreamed of and more. My dorm room became my sanctuary, my classmates became real friends, and for the first time in years, my weekends were my own. No crying babies, no sticky-fingered toddlers, just me and my choices. But you can't completely escape family obligations, especially during the holidays. I tried to visit as little as possible, but Thanksgiving and Christmas were non-negotiable. Mom would call weeks in advance, her voice thick with expectation. Everyone's asking about you, Ruby. The kids miss their aunt. The first Christmas break after I started college, I walked into absolute chaos. Sarah now had 2 boys, Tyler and his new baby brother Luke, while Emma had managed to add a boy named Max to her family alongside Sophie. But that wasn't even the half of it. Ruby, Aunt Janet called out the moment I walked through the door, immediately steering her twin 5-year-olds in my direction. The kids have been asking about you. No, they haven't, I thought. They barely know who I am. But before I could protest, Cousin Rachel's 7-year-old daughter attached herself to my leg, followed closely by Cousin Mike's 9-year-old son and 6-year-old daughter. Ruby, honey, Mom called from the kitchen, barely visible behind a mountain of dishes. Why don't you take the kids upstairs to your room? I'll bring up some snacks later. And just like that, I was corralling 8 children up the stairs, feeling more like a sheepdog than a college student. My old bedroom became a war zone, toys everywhere, juice spills on my childhood bedspread, crayon marks appearing mysteriously on the walls. Hours passed. My stomach growled as delicious smells wafted up from downstairs, where the adults were enjoying their peaceful holiday meal. When Mom finally appeared with a plate of kid-friendly snacks, she barely made eye contact. By the time I managed to sneak downstairs at 8 o'clock, after coordinating with various parents to collect their exhausted children, the dining room was empty except for dirty dishes and picked-over serving platters. "Oh, Ruby," Emma said, already putting on her coat. "Max was an angel for you, right? We've got to run, it's past his bedtime." Sarah followed suit, gathering her boys, while chatting with Mom about New Year's plans. Aunt Janet was helping her twins into their snow boots, while cousins Rachel and Mike were carrying their sleeping children to their cars. Not a single thank you. Not one person asked if I'd eaten. Not even a backwards glance as they all filed out, leaving me standing in the wreckage of Christmas dinner. "Ruby, be a dear and help me with these dishes," Mom called from the kitchen, as if I hadn't just spent the entire day doing her a massive favor. I looked at the mountain of dirty plates and serving dishes, evidence of a holiday meal I never got to enjoy. The message from Mom arrived during finals week, just as I was finishing my last paper for the semester. My phone buzzed with her usual pre-holiday update, but this one made my blood run cold. "Sarah and Emma are coming with the kids," it read cheerfully. "Plus Janet and her twins, Rachel's girls, Mike's kids, and exciting news. Sarah's sister-in-law Lisa is joining us with her 3 It'll be such a wonderful Christmas with all the little ones. I did the math in my head, 12 kids. 12. I sat there in the library, staring at my phone until the screen went dark, then lit it up again to make sure I'd read it right. The message stayed the same, but something inside me finally changed. 2 years of college had given me perspective. I'd watched my roommate Kate go home for holidays and return with stories of actual family time, board games, movie nights, proper Christmas dinners. My friend Jessica's biggest complaint about going home was having to share the TV remote with her siblings. Meanwhile, I'd spent every holiday of my adult life as an unpaid nanny service. I didn't reply to Mom's message. Instead, I packed my bag for Christmas break with an unusual sense of calm. For the first time, I wasn't dreading the holidays because I was going home with a plan. The days leading up to Christmas were deceptively normal. I helped Mom in the kitchen, breathing in the familiar scents of her signature dishes, pot roast, honey-glazed ham, and her famous apple pie. I decorated the Christmas tree, carefully hanging the ornaments I'd made in elementary school alongside the fancy glass balls Mom reserved for the front of the tree. Christmas Day arrived with a flurry of activity. Cars began pulling into our driveway one after another, each bringing more chaos than the last. Sarah arrived first with her boys, now 5 and 3, followed closely by Emma with Sophie and Max. Lisa, Sarah's sister-in-law, showed up with her 3 kids, all under 7. The rest of the relatives poured in after them, each family adding more children to the growing crowd. I watched from the corner of the living room as the noise level rose steadily. Sarah made her way toward me, her youngest balanced on her hip while the older one tugged at her sleeve. "Ruby," she called out with that familiar tone, the one that meant she was about to pass off her parental duties. "The boys have been so excited to see you. They can't wait to play with their favorite aunt." She was already nudging them in my direction, the same way she had 100 times before. But this time was different. This time, I stood my ground and looked her straight in the eye. "No," I said, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. "I'm not watching the kids today. I'm here to enjoy Christmas like everyone else." The room didn't exactly fall silent, there were too many children for that, but I could feel the ripple of shock move through the adults. Sarah's mouth dropped open. Mom froze in the doorway with a plate of cookies. Dad looked up from his newspaper with raised eyebrows. "But who's going to watch all the kids?" Emma's panicked voice carried across the living room as I turned toward the stairs. I glanced back just long enough to see Mom's helpless shrug and the bewildered looks on everyone's faces. The sight almost made me laugh. They looked like someone had just told them Christmas was cancelled. My feet carried me up the familiar stairs, past the family photos marking my sister's many achievements, and into my childhood bedroom. The soft click of the door closing behind me felt like the period at the end of a very long sentence. I flopped onto my bed, the same twin bed I'd had since middle school, and let out a long breath. Downstairs, I could hear the muffled sounds of chaos, adult voices rising and falling, children crying, the occasional thump of something being dropped or thrown. Can you believe her? So selfish. In my day. The fragments of conversation that filtered up through the floor made me smile. Let them talk. Let them finally face the reality of watching their own children. My phone buzzed with a message from Kate. "Did you do it? Did you finally stand up to them?" "Operation Freedom is in progress," I typed back. "Currently hiding in my room while they figure out how to parent their own kids." A knock on my door interrupted my texting. "Ruby?" Mom's voice was trying for concerned but landed somewhere between annoyed and desperate. "The children are asking for you." I didn't move from my comfortable position on the bed. "I'm busy, Mom." Her sigh was audible through the door, followed by the sound of her footsteps retreating down the hallway. I returned to my phone, joining a group chat with my college friends who were providing running commentary on their own family Christmas dramas. Jessica's uncle was drunk again, Mike's grandma was asking when he'd find a nice girl, Kate's brother had brought home a surprise girlfriend. 2 hours passed like this, in peaceful rebellion. My phone buzzed constantly with messages of support from friends who'd heard me complain about holiday babysitting duty for years. The chaos downstairs eventually settled into a different rhythm, one that didn't include my participation. When I finally descended the stairs for dinner, you'd have thought I'd risen from the dead, judging by everyone's expressions. Aunt Janet actually dropped her fork. Cousin Rachel's mouth hung open mid-sentence. I scanned the dining room, noting Emma's conspicuous absence. Through the doorway to the living room, I could see her attempting to organize some kind of game with the children, her usually perfect hair coming loose from its elegant updo, a stain of unknown origin on her festive sweater. Taking my seat at the adult table, a first in recent memory, I surveyed the spread before me. Everything was still hot, still fresh, still waiting to be enjoyed. No lukewarm leftovers, no picked-over remnants, no half-eaten children's portions. I could feel the weight of disapproving stares as I filled my plate with Mom's honey-glazed ham, Aunt Janet's sweet potato casserole, and Cousin Rachel's famous green bean dish. The clinking of silverware against plates couldn't quite mask the tension in the room. I was halfway through enjoying my first proper holiday meal in years when Sarah finally snapped. She'd been watching me eat with the kind of intensity usually reserved for nature documentaries about predators and prey. "Well," she announced to the table at large, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "looks like someone's gotten a little too big for their boots at college. Seems they've forgotten all about sisterly duties." I took my time with my spoonful of mashed potatoes, deliberately licking the spoon clean before responding. "The food really was excellent when you got to eat it fresh." "Funny thing about sisterly duties," I replied, keeping my voice level and calm. "I don't remember seeing free babysitter in any sisterhood manual. Maybe you could point that chapter out to me? Right after the part where parents are supposed to watch their own children?" The gasps around the table would have been comical if they weren't so genuine. Aunt Janet actually clutched her pearls. I hadn't known people really did that outside of movies. Cousin Rachel was suddenly very interested in her green beans, while Uncle Mike seemed to be trying to disappear into his dinner roll. Mom and Dad exchanged that special look they had, the one that meant they were disappointed but didn't want to cause a scene. Dad's fork was frozen halfway to his mouth, and Mom's smile had gone tight around the edges. But instead of the lecture I expected, Mom cleared her throat and asked Uncle Mike about his new job. The conversation stuttered back to life, though everyone kept shooting glances my way as if expecting me to sprout a second head. I just kept eating, savoring every bite of food that hadn't been picked over by tiny hands or gone cold while I changed diapers. About 20 minutes into dinner, Emma appeared in the doorway, looking like she'd been through a war. Her Christmas sweater was now sporting what looked like juice stains in addition to the earlier unknown substance, and her hair had completely escaped its elegant updo. "Sarah," she called, her voice carrying a hint of desperation. "Could you?" Sarah shot me one last withering look before pushing back from the table. The sisters exchanged places, with Emma practically collapsing into the vacated chair. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired I'd been feeling every holiday for years. Emma filled her plate mechanically, but she couldn't seem to resist giving me the stink eye between bites. I met her gaze and shrugged, then went back to enjoying my dinner. After finishing my meal, including 2 servings of Mom's apple pie, a luxury I'd never been able to enjoy before, I quietly excused myself from the table. No one protested. No one asked me to help clean up. No one demanded I take a shift with the kids. Morning light filtered through the living room windows as I came downstairs, still riding the high of my peaceful Christmas evening. That feeling evaporated the moment I saw them, Mom, Dad, Sarah, and Emma, sitting in an obvious ambush formation. Sarah didn't waste any time. "What kind of performance was that yesterday?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Making us look like bad parents in front of everyone?" I sank into an armchair, surprisingly calm. "Performance? You mean me wanting to enjoy Christmas like everyone else? I'm just tired of being the unpaid, unappreciated babysitter while everyone else gets to have an actual holiday." "But you never complained before," Mom interjected, her brow furrowed with confusion. I couldn't help but laugh. "Never complained? I've been complaining for years, Mom. But it was just too convenient to ignore me, wasn't it?" Too easy to keep exploiting the good little sister who never makes waves. They all started talking at once, their voices overlapping in a chorus of accusations and reminders of sisterly duty and family obligation. Dad kept mentioning how much they'd done for me over the years, Mom brought up how well they'd raised me, and my sisters alternated between guilt trips and outright attacks. I let them run out of steam before speaking again. "They're not my children," I said quietly but firmly. "I didn't give birth to them. I didn't decide to have them. They're your responsibility, not mine. Especially during the holidays when I'm supposed to be relaxing too." That's when Sarah played what she thought was her trump card. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Well, maybe it's time someone taught you a lesson about gratitude. Let's see how you manage without Mom and Dad paying your college tuition." The room fell silent. I watched Mom and Dad exchange uncertain glances, clearly caught off guard by the suggestion. But instead of the panic Sarah clearly expected to see on my face, I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, all the cards were on the table. I stood up slowly. "Actually, Sarah, Grandma's been paying my tuition from Grandpa's education fund, you know, the one he set up for all his granddaughters? The same fund that helped put you through nursing school and Emma through business school? And even if that wasn't the case, I have a partial scholarship. Plus, unlike some people, I'm not afraid of working to support myself." Without waiting for their response, I turned and walked upstairs. It took me less than 10 minutes to pack my bags. I'd gotten good at traveling light over the years. As I came back down, Mom and Dad started calling after me, their voices a mixture of anger and panic. But I was done talking. I walked out the front door, letting it close behind me on their protests and recriminations. The winter air bit at my cheeks as I headed to my car, but I barely felt it. The drive back to campus was oddly peaceful. As the miles between me and home increased, I systematically blocked their numbers: Mom, Dad, Sarah, Emma. Each tap on my phone screen felt like breaking another link in a chain I hadn't even realized was weighing me down. My dorm room welcomed me back with its blessed simplicity: no toys scattered across the floor, no sticky fingerprints on the windows, no constant background noise of children demanding attention. Just my books, my laptop, and my own thoughts. January passed in a blur of new classes and quiet weekends. February brought snow and a blessed lack of family drama. I threw myself into my studies, made plans with friends, and for the first time in years, felt like I was living my own life instead of existing in the margins of everyone else's. Then, one cold Saturday morning in late February, I looked out my dorm window and saw them, Mom, Dad, and Emma, standing in the parking lot, looking uncertain and out of place among the students rushing to and from classes. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home, but something in their body language made me pause. They looked different. Smaller somehow. Less like authority figures, and more like people who'd driven 4 hours to right a wrong. I met them in the lobby. Emma spoke first. "Can we buy you coffee? We'd like to talk." The campus cafe was quiet that morning. We sat at a corner table, steam rising from our cups, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Mom was the first to break it. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her cup. "After you left, well, we had some long conversations as a family." "Very long conversations," Emma added, meeting my eyes directly. "Ruby, we were wrong. All of us. We took advantage of you for years and called it family duty to make ourselves feel better about it." Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't realize, or maybe we didn't want to realize, how unfair it was. You deserved your own holidays, your own time. You deserved to be treated like an adult, not the family babysitter." I took a long sip of my coffee, letting their words sink in. "What about Sarah?" Emma sighed. "Sarah, she's still processing. You know how she is, she has trouble admitting when she's wrong. But the rest of us, we want to do better. Things will be different now," Mom promised. "No more pushing the kids on you. No more expecting you to give up your holidays. We want you to come home because you want to, not because you're needed for childcare. I studied their faces, the sincerity in Mom's eyes, the regret in Dad's expression, the openness in Emma's posture. Okay, I said finally. I believe you. That evening, after they'd left, I unblocked their numbers. Within minutes, I had a text from Emma, "Miss you, little sis." For real this time. The following months brought a new normal. I visited home some weekends, and it was actually pleasant. When Emma brought her kids, she watched them herself or hired a babysitter. Mom stopped trying to orchestrate family bonding moments that always seemed to end with me in charge of a pack of children. Sarah and I still haven't spoken. Sometimes I see her posts on social media, pictures of her boys growing up so fast. Part of me hopes that one day she'll realize what she did wrong, that she'll reach out first. Until then, I'm at peace with the distance.
My name is Amanda Parker. I'm married to an amazing man named Mark, and we have a little girl, Lily, who's the light of our lives. But back when I was 18, things weren't so picture perfect. I had just graduated high school, and it should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, that day ended up being the moment everything fell apart with my stepmom, Sandra, and my brother, Ian. It was right after the graduation ceremony. I was still wearing my cap and gown when Sandra pulled me aside with that fake, tight smile she always had when she was about to deliver bad news. "Amanda," she said, almost sweetly, "I need you to know that the college fund your dad left behind won't be yours after all." Just like that. No explanation, no empathy. Just dropped it like it was no big deal. I froze, staring at her, trying to process. "What do you mean?" I asked. My dad had told me about that fund himself. He'd set it up for me when I was a kid. Sandra didn't even flinch. She just shrugged like she was discussing the weather. "Well, Ian and I talked about it, and we think it would be better if the money went towards something more practical. Ian has a plan for it, and honestly, Amanda, you've always been more of a dreamer. College might not be the best fit for you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ian had always been the golden child, and Sandra treated him like he could do no wrong, but this was next level. "That money was for me. Dad wanted me to go to college," I said, my voice shaking. Ian came over, clearly eavesdropping, and of course he chimed in. "Amanda, calm down. You know I'll make good use of it. I'm planning to invest it, start a business. Dad would have wanted us to be smart about it. Besides, you can just take out loans like everyone else if college means that much to you." He said it so casually, like I should just roll over and accept it. My hands were trembling, and my heart was pounding in my chest. "You can't just take what's mine. That's stealing," I yelled. Sandra looked around, clearly embarrassed that I was making a scene, and hissed, "Lower your voice, Amanda. This is family business, and you're being dramatic." I wanted to scream, but instead, I just walked away. The whole graduation day turned into a blur after that. I remember sitting in my room that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. My dad had passed away the year before, and he'd always been my rock. Without him, I felt like Sandra and Ian had all the power, and I was completely alone. The next day, I tried to bring it up again, hoping Sandra might reconsider. She just rolled her eyes and said, "Amanda, you're an adult now. It's time to grow up and figure things out for yourself. That money is being used for the family, which includes Ian." When I told Mark about it later, he was my boyfriend at the time, he was furious. "They can't do that to you. That fund was meant for your future." But legally, I didn't know what I could do. The account was in Sandra's name, and without my dad, I had no one to fight for me. Mark offered to help me figure it out, but I told him to let it go. I didn't want to fight a losing battle and make things even worse. So I let it go, or at least I pretended to. Deep down, I made a promise to myself. I'd prove them wrong. I'd show them I could succeed without their help. The next few years were tough, to say the least. I worked multiple part-time jobs just to scrape by while taking classes at a community college. I couldn't afford to go to a 4-year university right away, but I was determined to finish my degree, even if it took twice as long. Meanwhile, Ian was living it up. He'd started some business that was really just a fancy way of saying he was blowing through the money. Sandra bragged about him constantly, saying things like, "Your brother is so ambitious. You should learn from him." It made me sick. Mark stuck by me through all of it. He encouraged me to keep going even when I felt like giving up. By the time I transferred to a university, we were engaged. I remember Sandra's reaction when she found out. "Are you sure you're ready for marriage, Amanda? It's a big responsibility, and you're still figuring out your life." She said it with that same condescending tone she always used, as if I was some clueless kid. Ian, of course, chimed in with, "Yeah, maybe you should focus on your career, if you can even call it that." I wanted to snap back, but I just smiled and said, "Don't worry about me. I'm doing just fine." Those years in university were some of the hardest of my life. I was constantly juggling work, classes, and trying to keep my head above water. Most days, I barely had time to eat a proper meal. I worked evenings at a coffee shop and weekends at a bookstore, and in between shifts, I crammed in studying wherever I could. It felt like I was living on autopilot, just grinding day after day. There were nights I'd cry in frustration, wondering if it was even worth it. But every time I thought about quitting, I'd hear my dad's voice in my head, reminding me why I started in the first place. That fund might have been stolen from me, but they couldn't take away my determination. It wasn't just the financial strain that made it hard, it was the emotional weight of feeling completely unsupported by my own family. Sandra and Ian never checked in on me, not once. In fact, they acted like I didn't exist. Sandra was still throwing her little house parties, bragging about Ian and his big plans, while I was eating instant noodles and scraping together rent. I'll never forget the time I ran into Ian at the grocery store. He was picking up expensive steaks, and I had a basket with canned soup and some store-brand bread. He looked at me, smirked, and said, "Still doing that whole struggling student thing, huh? You could have had it easier if you just played your cards right." I didn't respond. I couldn't trust myself to speak without blowing up. By my second year, things started to shift a little. I managed to land a paid internship with a local marketing firm, which felt like a lifeline. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to let me cut back on one of my part-time jobs. Plus, it gave me real-world experience, and for the first time, I started to feel like I was building something for my future. But even then, it wasn't easy. My days were a blur of early morning classes, afternoons at the internship, and nights spent studying or working shifts at the coffee shop. My social life was non-existent, and I was constantly exhausted. One of the lowest points came when my laptop died a week before finals. I didn't have the money to replace it, so I borrowed an old one from a friend. It was so slow that just opening a document took forever. I remember sitting in the campus library at midnight trying to finish a paper that was due the next day, and just breaking down. I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. But then I thought about Sandra and Ian, how they'd probably laugh if they saw me struggling, and that gave me the push I needed to keep going. I wasn't going to let them win. It wasn't just the lack of support from Sandra and Ian. It was the way they'd go out of their way to humiliate me, especially in front of others. There was one Thanksgiving dinner I'll never forget. I had just started college. I hadn't planned on going, but Mark convinced me to show up for appearances. I should have trusted my gut and stayed home. Sandra was hosting, and the table was packed with her friends and a few of Ian's business contacts, if you know what I mean. Everything was going smoothly, until Ian decided to open his mouth. "So, Amanda," he said loudly, smirking as he leaned back in his chair, "how's that glamorous student life treating you? Still making lattes and scraping by?" A few of the guests chuckled nervously, probably unsure if he was joking. I felt my cheeks burn, but before I could respond, Sandra chimed in. "Ian, don't be mean," she said in that fake, syrupy tone she always used when she wanted to sound magnanimous. "Amanda is doing the best she can. Not everyone is cut out for success right away." The way she said it, with that little pause before doing the best she can, made it clear what she really thought. Mark was my anchor during those years. No matter how bad things got, he was always there to remind me why I was pushing through. I'd come home from a late shift or the library, completely drained, and he'd have dinner waiting for me, even if it was just grilled cheese or leftovers. There was one night in particular that sticks with me. I'd just failed an important exam, and it felt like everything was falling apart. I came home, dropped my bag on the floor, and just started crying right there in the doorway. Mark didn't ask what was wrong right away. He just hugged me and let me cry until I could talk. When I finally got the words out, he said, "Amanda, this one test doesn't define you. You're doing something so many people would have given up on by now. You're allowed to stumble, but you're not going to fall. You're stronger than this." Then he made me hot chocolate and sat with me until I felt like myself again. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he believed in me. Even when I couldn't believe in myself. Knowing he had my back made all the difference. By the time I graduated, I felt like I'd climbed a mountain. It wasn't just the degree itself, it was everything it represented. I'd made it, despite all the obstacles, despite Sandra and Ian's complete lack of support. I didn't invite them to the ceremony. Mark and a few close friends were there cheering me on as I crossed the stage. I remember thinking, they don't get to take this moment away from me. It was one of the proudest days of my life. Not long after graduation, I landed a job at a mid-sized marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and for the first time, I could breathe a little. Mark and I got married the following year, and not long after that, we found out I was pregnant with Lily. It felt like everything was finally coming together. Sandra and Ian? I didn't hear from them. It was like I didn't exist to them. Climbing the career ladder wasn't easy, but it felt like a natural continuation of the grit I'd built during college. I started at the bottom, managing small accounts no one else wanted. I worked hard, stayed late, and took on projects that weren't even in my job description. Slowly, people started to notice. My manager once pulled me aside after a big presentation and said, "Amanda, the way you handled that client, it's like you've been doing this for years. You've got a real talent for connecting with people." It meant the world to me, but it also stung in a strange way. Hearing praise from colleagues and managers, people who barely knew me, only highlighted how little I'd ever gotten from my own family. I'd sit in meetings where my boss would brag about my work ethic, or I'd overhear coworkers saying things like, "Amanda's a star, she's going places," and part of me felt empty. I kept thinking, why couldn't Ian have said something like that? Why couldn't Sandra have seen my worth? Instead, all I ever got from them were backhanded comments or outright dismissal. It was a hollow kind of sadness, knowing the approval I'd craved as a teenager would never come from them. My life kept moving forward, and with every step, I felt like I was finally building something solid. After a few years at the firm, I landed a promotion to account manager, overseeing a team of my own. It felt surreal. Just a few years ago, I was struggling to pay for groceries, and now I was sitting in meetings with executives, presenting strategies I had developed. Mark was my biggest cheerleader through it all. When I got the promotion, he surprised me with a little dinner party at home, just us and a few close friends. "You've earned this," he said, raising his glass to toast me. "No one deserves it more." Around the same time, we welcomed Lily into the world. The moment I held her for the first time, everything else faded away. I remember looking at her tiny face and thinking, I'm going to make sure you always feel loved and supported, no matter what. Being a mom added a whole new layer of joy and purpose to my life. But while my world was brightening, Sandra and Ian's was starting to crumble. Ian's big plans had fallen apart. His business tanked. And Sandra, who had always prided herself on her social status, suddenly seemed less confident. The whispers started to spread. They were struggling financially, and Ian was back living at home with Sandra. I'll never forget the day I ran into Ian and Sandra at the grocery store. It had been years since I'd seen either of them, and honestly, I wasn't prepared for how different they looked. I was in the organic aisle, picking out some fancy cheese for a dinner Mark and I were hosting. Lily was in the cart, babbling about something, when I turned the corner and almost bumped into them. Ian was pushing a cart with just a few items, mostly canned food and a bag of rice, and Sandra was trailing behind him, looking worn out and older than I'd ever seen her. "Amanda," Sandra said, her voice a mix of shock and awkwardness. Ian glanced up, and his expression hardened when he saw me. I didn't know what to say at first. I was standing there with my cart full of high-end groceries, Lily giggling in her seat, while they looked like they were barely scraping by. Sandra tried to muster up her usual fake smile. "You're looking... well," she said, her eyes darting to my cart. Ian just grunted, clearly too proud to say anything. "Yeah, things have been good," I replied casually, not wanting to rub it in, but unable to hide the satisfaction I felt. It was a stark contrast from the last time we'd crossed paths at a grocery store when I was the one struggling and Ian was flaunting his success. After that run-in, things changed. Suddenly, Sandra and Ian were trying to get back into my life. It started with small things, Sandra calling to check in or sending me awkward messages on social media. "Hi, Amanda, just wanted to see how you're doing. It's been so long." She never outright mentioned our encounter at the grocery store, but the timing was too obvious to ignore. Ian wasn't as subtle. He sent me a text not long after. "Hey sis, we should catch up sometime. I've got some ideas I'd love to run by you." At first I ignored them. I didn't trust their intentions, and honestly, I was still too bitter to entertain the idea of reconnecting. But they didn't stop. Sandra started calling Mark too, under the guise of being a concerned stepmom, asking about Lily and how we were doing. Mark, being the kind-hearted person he is, told me, maybe they're trying to make amends. I wasn't so sure. It felt less like genuine interest and more like they'd seen how well I was doing and wanted to latch on. Part of me wanted to confront them outright, but another part of me was curious to see how far they'd take it. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when I pulled into the driveway and saw Ian and Sandra standing in front of my house. At first, I thought I was imagining things. They looked out of place, like characters in the wrong scene of a movie. Sandra was clutching her purse tightly, her face tense, while Ian stood with his hands in his pockets, looking everywhere but at me. Mark and Lily were at the zoo with his parents, so it was just me. I couldn't go with them because I had to finish some things at the office for an important meeting that I was going to have on Monday. I sighed, already bracing myself for whatever this was. As I stepped out of the car, Sandra's face lit up with that overly rehearsed smile I knew too well. "Amanda? What a coincidence," she said, as if they hadn't been waiting there on purpose. Ian gave me a stiff nod, still avoiding eye contact. "What are you doing here?" I asked bluntly, not in the mood for pleasantries. Sandra waved a hand dismissively, like my question didn't matter. "Oh, we just thought we'd drop by to catch up. It's been too long, don't you think?" I stayed quiet. Sandra plastered on her rehearsed smile, the one she used to soften bad news or manipulate people into doing what she wanted. "Amanda, sweetheart, we've been thinking about how proud your dad would be of you. You've done so well for yourself. Look at this beautiful house. You've really built something amazing." I stayed silent, my arms crossed. I wasn't falling for her flattery. After a moment of awkward silence, Ian cleared his throat and finally looked at me. "Yeah, what Sandra is saying is, we've hit a bit of a rough patch. Things haven't been easy, you know." "Rough patch?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "What does that mean exactly?" Sandra looked at Ian as if he had jumped into it too fast. "Oh, it's nothing too serious. Just some financial hiccups. Ian's business didn't quite work out the way we hoped, and, well, I've had some medical bills come up recently. We're just, how do I put this, a little strapped for cash at the moment." "And?" I pressed, already sensing where this was going. Ian shifted uncomfortably. "And we thought maybe you could help us out. You know, just a little something to help us get back on our feet." "Help you out?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're asking me for money?" Sandra gave an exaggerated sigh, her fake smile dropping. "Amanda, you make it sound so harsh. It's not like we're asking for charity. Just a loan. You're doing so well, and it's clear you can afford it. We wouldn't even be asking if it wasn't really necessary." "Necessary?" I echoed, feeling the heat rising in my chest. You mean like how it was necessary to steal my college fund? Or to tell me I'd never amount to anything? Is this one of those necessities? Ian's jaw tightened. That's not fair, Amanda. We did what we thought was best at the time. I let out a sharp laugh. Best for who, Ian? For you? For Sandra? Certainly not for me. Sandra put a hand to her chest like I'd slapped her. Amanda, that's ancient history. Can't we just move past that? We're here now trying to make amends. Doesn't family mean anything to you? Family, I shot back, my voice rising. You mean the same family that left me to fend for myself? That made fun of me for struggling through college? That never lifted a finger to help me? You've got some nerve showing up here and throwing the word family around. Ian's face turned red, and his calm facade started to crack. You're not being reasonable. You've got everything now. A house, a husband, a great job. We're just asking for a little help. You owe us that much. Owe you? I snapped. I owe you nothing. Everything I have, I built on my own, with no thanks to either of you. And now you think you can just waltz in here and guilt me into giving you money? Not a chance. Sandra's mask of politeness finally slipped. I can't believe this, she hissed. After everything we've done for you? Done for me? I interrupted, laughing bitterly. What exactly have you done for me? Besides making my life harder at every turn? Ian lost his temper completely. You're a selfish, ungrateful brat. We gave you a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us? I stared at them, stunned by their audacity. Get off my property, I said, my voice cold. I'm done with this conversation. Sandra's eyes narrowed and she leaned in, her voice dripping with venom. You'll regret this, Amanda. One day you'll need us and we won't be there. I stepped back, opening the door to my house. Good. I've been doing just fine without you. As I stepped toward the door, Sandra let out a bitter laugh. Fine, Amanda. Stay on your high horse. But don't forget where you came from. You're nothing without that fancy degree. And we're the ones who made sure you had a roof over your head to even get that far. You should be thanking us. Ian chimed in, his voice dripping with spite. You think you're so much better than us now, don't you? With your perfect little family and your nice house. Don't get too comfortable, Amanda. Life has a way of knocking people like you down a peg. I stopped in my tracks, turning to face them one last time. You're right. Life does have a way of knocking people down. You should know. You're living proof. With that, I stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind me. Even from inside, I could hear Sandra muttering angrily as they walked away. Ungrateful. After everything we've done for her, she'll come crawling back one day. But as their voices faded, all I felt was relief. For the first time in years, I truly understood the power of closing a door, literally and figuratively, and this one, I knew, would stay closed. About a year later, Mark and I took Lily to an amusement park. It was a beautiful day. Blue skies, laughter everywhere, and the smell of popcorn in the air. Lily was ecstatic, pointing at every ride and begging to go on the roller coasters. We were making our way toward the food stalls when I saw him. Ian. He was coming out of a public restroom, wearing a faded park uniform and holding a mop and bucket. For a moment, he didn't see us. His head was down, and he looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped. But then, as we got closer, he glanced up and froze. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I could see the recognition, and the shame, on his face. Before I could say anything, he turned on his heel and walked away, pushing the mop bucket in front of him as fast as he could. His posture was stiff, like he was trying to hold on to some shred of pride. I just stood there, watching him disappear into the crowd. Mark noticed my pause and looked at me. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly, forcing a smile for Lily's sake. "Yeah, let's go find that cotton candy stand." As we left the park that day, I couldn't stop thinking about Ian. Seeing him like that, avoiding me, ashamed, brought back a flood of memories. The insults, the dismissive comments, the years of being treated like I was less than nothing, and Sandra, always there to back him up, to twist the knife a little deeper. For so long, I'd carried the weight of their words, letting them make me feel small. But now it felt different. I looked at Mark, holding Lily's hand as she chattered about her favorite rides, and I smiled. This was my life now. A loving husband, a bright, beautiful daughter, a career I'd worked so hard to build. Everything I'd achieved, I'd done without them. And the best part? I didn't need their validation anymore. They'd spent years trying to tear me down, but here I was, happy, successful, and surrounded by people who truly loved me. I thought about how Sandra and Ian's lives had unraveled, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. But it didn't last long. They'd made their choices, and they were living the consequences. I'd spent enough time mourning the family I wished I had. Now I was focused on the family I'd built, the one that mattered. As we walked to the car, Lily tugged on my arm, pulling me into her excitement about the day. I smiled down at her, feeling nothing but gratitude for the life I had now. Angel passed away, but some days it feels like the weight of it still crushes me. I loved her deeply, even though life had a way of putting me in the background while my sister Margaret took center stage. My name is Rebecca, 27 years old, a painter who scrapes by with small commissions. I'm not the kind of person who craves attention, but sometimes I wonder if that's why Mom always seemed to gravitate toward Margaret instead of me. Margaret seemed to have everything: a husband, a nice house, and the luxury of never having to take responsibility for anything. Mom adored her, always defending her no matter what. Meanwhile, I was the one making sure things didn't completely fall apart. "Why are you always so dramatic, Rebecca?" Margaret scoffed one day as I helped Mom pack her things to move into the small house on Margaret's property. She was feeling sick lately, and we thought it would be better if she lived closer to one of us. "It's not like I'm doing nothing. I'm giving her a roof over her head, aren't I?" I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. "She's not some stranger, Margaret. She's our mom, and that roof is a guest house you haven't used in years. Also, she's paying rent. You're not giving her anything." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. "Do you know how many people would kill for a setup like this? She's lucky to have me." "Lucky?" The word came out like a laugh, bitter and sharp. "You mean lucky that I'm here handling everything while you take the credit?" Margaret just shrugged and walked off toward her house, leaving me standing there with a mix of anger and disbelief. It was always like this, her doing the bare minimum and acting like she was a saint for it. Later that evening, we got the results. I called Margaret to fill her in. "Margaret, it's bad," I said, my voice trembling. "It's lymphoma. The doctor said 6 months to a year." There was a pause on the other end before she finally responded, her tone annoyingly flat. "Well, that sucks, but at least she has her little house here. That's something, right?" I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "That's all you have to say? That sucks?" "She's dying, Margaret. Dying." "What do you want me to do, Rebecca?" she snapped. "Drop everything and become her private nurse? I have a life too, you know." "You could start by showing some basic compassion," I shot back. "Maybe take her to a doctor's appointment once in a while or spend some actual time with her." She sighed loudly. "Look, I'm doing what I can. Let's not make this about you, okay?" I hung up after that. There was no point in arguing. Margaret would always find a way to turn things around and make herself the victim. After Mom got sick and started treatment, she became too weak and tired to manage her personal finances. Since I was the one taking care of her day-to-day needs, Margaret had taken over handling her bank account and bills. I didn't love the idea, but Mom trusted Margaret, so I let it go. I thought, maybe for once, Margaret would step up and actually do the right thing. One day, Mom asked me to check her bank account balance for her. She'd been worried about some upcoming expenses and wanted to be sure she had enough. "Rebecca, could you stop by the bank for me?" she asked, her voice frail but warm. "I just want to make sure everything's in order." "Of course, Mom," I said. brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "I'll handle it." I went to the bank that afternoon, still thinking everything would be fine. But when the teller handed me the account summary, my heart dropped. Her account was almost empty. The savings she had worked so hard to build after selling her car, gone. And then I saw it, one massive withdrawal made a few weeks earlier. The name on the transaction hit me like a punch to the gut: Margaret Bennett. I stared at the slip of paper, my hands trembling. There had to be some mistake. Margaret wouldn't. No, she couldn't. But the evidence was right in front of me. I stepped outside the bank, the cold air hitting my face like a slap, and I called Margaret immediately. "What's up?" she answered casually, as if we hadn't been through months of hell. "Are you serious?" I said, my voice shaking. "Margaret, why the hell did you withdraw all of Mom's money?" There was a pause before she answered, her tone defensive. "Rebecca, calm down. It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I snapped. "Her account is empty, Margaret. Empty. And there's a transaction for the full amount, with your name on it." She sighed, like I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. "It's a loan, okay? I needed the money for some unexpected repairs. I was going to put it back in a few months. Mom doesn't even know. It's not like she needs it right now." "A loan?" I almost laughed, the bitterness choking in my throat. "You think you can just borrow every last penny she has without asking her? Without telling anyone? She's sick, Margaret. That money wasn't yours to take." "Don't be so dramatic, Rebecca," she said, her voice sharp now. "I'll pay it back. I always planned to. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "You've got to be kidding me," I said, my voice low and shaking. "Mom is dying, and you think this is about me being dramatic? You're disgusting, Margaret." I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady my voice. "You have no idea what this has done, do you? Mom asked me to check because she was worried about paying for her groceries, Margaret. Groceries. Do you understand how humiliating it's going to be for her if she finds out?" "She won't find out," Margaret snapped, "because you're not going to tell her." My stomach twisted at the sheer audacity of her tone. "Why the hell wouldn't I? She deserves to know what you've done." "Because it'll only stress her out." Margaret cut me off, her voice sharp and condescending. "Do you really think she needs that right now? She's already dealing with enough. Besides, I'll put the money back before she even notices. You're always acting like I'm the bad guy here, Rebecca. But I'm trying to handle everything the best I can." "Handle everything?" I practically shouted, the anger boiling over. "You mean dumping all the hard parts on me while you play the perfect daughter? Don't you dare act like you're the one making sacrifices." "Rebecca," she hissed, her voice dropping, "if you care about Mom, you'll let this go. She doesn't need to know about this. And you, stop trying to make me the villain just because you can't stand that she trusted me with her finances." I hung up, unable to listen to another word. My chest felt tight, my heart pounding as I stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the cars passing by. Margaret was trying to spin this into something noble, as if she was doing Mom some kind of favor by stealing from her. But what could I do? Telling Mom would break her heart, and the thought of adding to her pain made me feel sick. I needed to talk to someone, to vent, to make sense of the storm brewing in my head. Without thinking twice, I called my best friend Laura. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Rebecca, how are you?" she asked, her voice warm but slightly concerned. She could always tell when something was wrong. "It's Margaret," I said, my voice cracking. I told her everything: the bank account, the withdrawal, the pathetic excuse Margaret had given me. By the time I finished, I could hear Laura's breathing had quickened. "She took everything?" Laura asked, disbelief dripping from her voice. "And she expects you to just keep quiet about it?" "She said it's a loan," I said bitterly, pacing my small living room. "She's acting like she's doing Mom a favor by not telling her." Laura didn't respond right away, and when she did, her voice was low and firm. "Rebecca, you can't let her get away with this. What if she doesn't pay it back? Your mom needs that money. She's depending on you." "I know," I said, running a hand through my hair. "But if I tell Mom, it'll crush her, and Margaret knows that. She's using it against me." "Of course she is," Laura said sharply. "She knows you're too kind to blow this up, and she's taking advantage of that. But Rebecca, someone has to hold her accountable." I sighed heavily, sinking into the couch. "I don't even know how. Margaret doesn't listen to me. She never has. And George, her husband, always so full of himself." I stopped myself, but Laura jumped in. "George knows about this, doesn't he?" she asked. "He has to." "Probably," I admitted. "He's just as bad as she is, always backing her up no matter what. You should have seen how smug they were when Mom moved into that guest house. Like they were saints for letting her live there." "You're not alone in this," Laura said gently. "I'll help however I can. But Rebecca, you need to stand your ground." Her words gave me a small flicker of strength, but I still felt trapped. I couldn't tell Mom. I couldn't confront Margaret without it escalating into a full-blown war. But I couldn't just sit there and let her walk all over us. The next few days were unbearable. I couldn't get the thought of Margaret's betrayal out of my head. Every time I saw Mom, it was like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. She'd smile at me, thank me for helping her with dinner or sitting with her during treatments, completely unaware of what Margaret had done. I couldn't bring myself to tell her. Every time I opened my mouth, the words got stuck in my throat. But Margaret didn't make it easy to let things go. A few days later, I was at Mom's house, helping her organize her medical bills, when Margaret strolled in like she owned the place. George was with her, carrying a few grocery bags that he plopped on the counter without so much as a word to either of us. "Look at this," Margaret said, holding up a small bouquet of flowers she'd clearly just picked up from the store. "I thought these might brighten up the place. Don't you think, Mom?" "Oh, Margaret, that's so thoughtful," Mom said, her face lighting up. I bit my tongue so hard I thought I might draw blood. "Thoughtful?" "She emptied your bank account, Mom." But instead, I just nodded stiffly, pretending to focus on the papers in front of me. George caught my expression and smirked. "You should learn a thing or two from Margaret, Rebecca. She's always thinking of others." It was the last straw. I slammed the papers down on the table and stood up. "Thinking of others? Are you serious?" My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. "Rebecca," Mom said softly, looking startled. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I muttered, forcing myself to calm down. "I just remembered something I need to take care of." I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, unable to stay in the same room as Margaret and George for another second. As I walked out, I heard Margaret's voice behind me, low and mocking. She's always so dramatic. The next day, I needed to clear my head, so I decided to run a few errands in town. I was walking down Main Street, juggling a grocery list in my head, when I saw her. Margaret, stepping out of one of the fanciest boutiques in town, laughing and chatting with a sales assistant as George held the door open for her. She had at least 3 shopping bags in her hands, each with the store's logo plastered all over them. I froze mid-step, my stomach churning. There she was, spending God knows how much money on clothes and who knows what else, while Mom was budgeting for groceries. The image of Margaret's name on that withdrawal flashed in my mind, and my hands clenched into fists. Without thinking, I marched straight up to her. "Margaret," I called, my voice sharp and loud enough to make her flinch. She turned, her smile fading as she saw me. "Oh, Rebecca," she said, her tone saccharine and fake. "What a surprise! Out shopping too." "Shopping?" I hissed, glaring at the bags in her hands. "What are you even doing here? Spending more of Mom's money?" Her face tightened, but she quickly recovered, flashing a tight smile. "Don't be ridiculous. This is my money. George and I work hard, Rebecca. Not that you'd understand." George snorted beside her, clearly amused by her jab. "Careful, Rebecca," he said smugly. "Jealousy doesn't suit you." "Jealous?" I laughed bitterly. "No, Margaret, I'm not jealous. I'm disgusted. You drained Mom's account, and now you're out here buying designer clothes like nothing happened. How do you sleep at night?" Margaret's expression hardened. She stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. "I told you it's alone. And if you care about Mom, you'll drop it. Do you want her to know about this? To worry about something she doesn't need to?" I stared at her, my chest heaving with anger. "You're unbelievable. Mom deserves to know the truth. She deserves better than you." Margaret leaned in closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You tell her and you'll break her heart. She's already sick, Rebecca. Do you really want to be the reason she gets worse? Think about that before you open your mouth." As I stood there, fuming at Margaret's audacity, a wave of memories hit me. This wasn't the first time Margaret had pulled something like this, and deep down, I knew it wouldn't be the last. Mom, bless her sweet heart, had always been Margaret's biggest defender, no matter how awful her behavior was. When we were kids, Margaret had a knack for pushing every limit. She'd borrow money from Mom's purse for things she needed, like concert tickets or new shoes. Mom would find out eventually, of course, but she'd just shake her head and say, "Oh, Margaret, you should have just asked." And that was it. No punishment, no accountability, just forgiveness on a silver platter. Even as we got older, nothing changed. Margaret always had an excuse, always a sob story to back her actions. There was the time she borrowed Mom's car without permission and wrecked it. She cried and blamed a pothole, and somehow Mom ended up comforting her, saying, "Cars can be fixed, but you can't replace family." I remember sitting there, stunned, while Margaret smiled through her crocodile tears. Mom had a heart too big for her own good. She always believed the best in people, especially in Margaret. "She's your sister, Rebecca," Mom would say whenever I tried to bring up Margaret's behavior. "She's not perfect, but she means well." I hated that phrase. She means well. It was Mom's way of justifying everything Margaret did, from lying to taking advantage of her kindness. But this time was different. This wasn't a harmless mistake or a moment of bad judgment. This was calculated, cruel, and completely unforgivable. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that, if Mom knew, she'd find a way to forgive her anyway. That was who Mom was. A sweet, selfless person who couldn't see the bad in the people she loved. Margaret and George had always measured people by one thing: money. To them, a person's worth was directly tied to their bank account. If you weren't wealthy, you simply didn't matter. I'd seen them brush off neighbors, coworkers, even distant relatives who didn't fit their idea of successful. There was this one time when Mom invited Mrs. Hathaway, an elderly widow from down the street, over for tea. She'd been a kind woman, always bringing baked goods and little gifts for Mom. But when Margaret and George stopped by and saw her sitting there in her worn-out cardigan, Margaret barely acknowledged her presence. George didn't even bother hiding his disdain. Later, Margaret pulled me aside and said, "Why does Mom even talk to people like that? What can they possibly offer her?" It was sickening. And the irony of it all? Their own so-called success was as fragile as glass. Beneath the surface, George and Margaret were drowning in debt. They'd been borrowing money from the bank for years, refinancing their home, maxing out credit cards, whatever it took to keep up appearances. Margaret once let it slip to me after a few too many glasses of wine that they were stretched thin, but she quickly laughed it off, saying, "It's just temporary. George's investments will pay off soon." But they never did. That's the thing about people like Margaret and George. They live for the image, the illusion of wealth, even when it's built on lies. Their fancy cars, their designer clothes, their perfectly manicured lawn, it was all for show. And now, seeing Margaret use Mom's money to keep that illusion alive made me feel sick to my stomach. Mom, who had worked so hard to save every penny after selling her car, deserved so much better than to have her sacrifices thrown away on Margaret's shallow lifestyle. Mom's decline was slow at first, small things like losing her appetite or needing more rest. But as the months went by, it became harder to ignore. Her energy faded, her voice grew weaker, and some days, it was like the vibrant woman I'd always known was slipping away right before my eyes. I tried to be strong for her, but the weight of everything, taking care of her, managing my own life, and the constant frustration with Margaret, was becoming unbearable. One day, after another tense encounter with Margaret, Laura suggested I try something to clear my head. "Rebecca, you're burning out," she said gently. "You're doing everything for everyone, and it's not sustainable. Take a couple of hours for yourself. Go to that yoga class you've been talking about." I hesitated, but finally agreed. Mom was having a quiet day, and Margaret was supposed to be around, so I thought, just this once I could step away. I left my phone on silent in my bag, telling myself it would only be for a little while. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe, even if it was just for an hour or two. When the class ended, I grabbed my phone and saw the missed calls, 6 from Margaret. My stomach dropped as I fumbled to unlock the screen. Her last voicemail made my blood run cold. "Rebecca, it's Mom," Margaret's voice said, trembling but sharp. "She's gone. I don't know where you were, but you should have been here." I don't even remember how I got home. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled into the house where Margaret was sitting on the couch, her face red and blotchy. "She just stopped breathing," she said, looking up at me. "I was here, but there was nothing I could do." I couldn't speak. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. I'd been gone for 2 hours, and I hadn't been there to say goodbye. Mom had died at home, in the little guest house she'd moved into with Margaret by her side. The guilt hit me like a freight train. "You should have been here," Margaret said, her voice cold now. "I don't know why you thought yoga was more important than Mom. She needed you, Rebecca." Her words sliced through me. I wanted to scream, to tell her that she had no right to judge me, not after everything she'd done. But I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, tears streaming down my face as the weight of losing Mom settled in. The day of Mom's funeral was cold and gray, the kind of weather that seeped into your bones. Mom had been deeply religious, so it was only fitting that the service was held at her beloved church. The stained glass windows cast soft colors onto the pews as the organ played a somber melody. I sat near the front, clutching a tissue in one hand and a picture of Mom in the other. My heart was heavy, not just with grief, but with the weight of everything that had happened. Margaret and George arrived late, of course, sweeping into the church as if it were a fashion show. Margaret was dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure, her neck adorned with a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my monthly rent. George, in an expensive-looking suit, walked beside her, carrying an air of smug self-importance. The way they moved, it was like they thought the funeral was about them, not Mom. As they made their way to the front, I caught the whispers. People were glancing at me with judgment in their eyes, leaning toward each other to murmur behind their hands. My stomach twisted, and I tried to focus on the picture of Mom in my lap, but it was impossible not to hear. "Rebecca wasn't even there when Angel passed," one voice whispered. "Margaret said she was off doing yoga," another added, the disdain dripping from their words. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Margaret had made sure to plant that seed in everyone's mind. She wanted them to see me as the selfish daughter, the one who abandoned Mom when she needed me most. And judging by the looks I was getting, it had worked. Margaret slid into the pew next to me, flashing me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You okay, Rebecca?" she whispered, her tone dripping with faux concern. "I know it must be hard, knowing you weren't there for her." I stared straight ahead, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a response. The priest began to speak, his voice filling the church as he talked about Mom's kindness, her unwavering faith, and her love for her family. I felt tears sting my eyes as he mentioned how devoted she had been to her daughters. If only he knew the truth. As the priest continued his eulogy, his voice grew softer, more intimate, as if he were speaking directly to each of us. "Angel was a remarkable woman," he said, glancing at the congregation. "She loved deeply, forgave endlessly, and carried a quiet strength that inspired those around her. In my final visit with her just days before her passing, she entrusted me with something very personal. A letter." A murmur rippled through the church. My breath hitched. A letter? I glanced at Margaret, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. George furrowed his brow, looking confused but not concerned. I, on the other hand, felt a strange mix of curiosity and dread. "She asked me to read it today," the priest continued, holding up a sealed envelope. "It was her final wish, and she made me promise that I would share her words with all of you." The church fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop as he carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. The anticipation was unbearable. My heart pounded as the priest adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud. "To everyone gathered here today," he began, his voice steady, "I want to thank you for coming to celebrate my life. I lived a life of love and faith, and though it was not without challenges, I leave this world with gratitude in my heart. However, there is something I must say before I rest, something that weighs heavily on me and must be brought into the light." I froze. I could feel the tension in the room as everyone leaned in, waiting for what came next. "I have always believed in forgiveness," the priest read, his tone solemn, "but forgiveness does not erase the truth. And the truth is, in my final months, I experienced a betrayal so painful that it nearly broke me. Margaret, my eldest daughter, I trusted you with everything, my care, my home, my finances, but you took advantage of that trust in ways that no mother should ever endure." Gasps echoed through the church. Margaret's face went pale, and she shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the pew. George's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, his eyes darting toward the priest. "You took the money I had saved from selling my car, money I had set aside for my care, for emergencies. Rebecca, who gave so much of herself to ensure I was never alone, I know that you knew about this, but decided to protect me so that I wouldn't suffer in my final months. God bless you for being such a wonderful child," the priest continued. "Margaret, you drained my bank account and what was left of my energy, leaving me with nothing. I knew, but I kept quiet. I didn't want to shame you or cause more pain in my final days, but people need to know who you are." My hands flew to my mouth as tears streamed down my face. She knew. All this time, Mom knew. The guilt, the fear of breaking her heart, it had been for nothing. She had carried that pain herself, silently. The priest's words lingered in the air, heavy and unshakable. The silence in the church was deafening. All eyes turned to Margaret, who sat frozen, her face pale as if all the blood had drained from it. George shifted uncomfortably beside her, his usual smugness replaced with unease. No one said a word, but the weight of judgment in the room was palpable. I didn't move. My tears were flowing freely now, but they weren't just for Mom. They were for the truth she had carried alone, for the strength it must have taken to leave this world with grace despite everything Margaret had done. My chest ached with a mix of grief, relief, and rage. Margaret finally broke the silence. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, her voice trembling with indignation. She was sick, probably confused. I did everything for her, everything. And this is how she repays me? People around her started to whisper, their faces filled with shock and disdain. George grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down, but she yanked it away. "You don't know what it's like," she continued, her voice louder now, almost desperate. "I was under so much pressure. I needed that money for the house, for both of us." "That's enough, Margaret," the priest said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is not the time to justify your actions. Your mother's words speak for themselves." Margaret glared at him, then at me. Her eyes burned with a mix of anger and humiliation. "I hope you're happy," she spat before storming out of the church, George trailing awkwardly behind her. The sound of the heavy doors slamming shut echoed through the sanctuary. I sat there, stunned, as people began to murmur around me. Some whispered words of sympathy, while others exchanged looks that said everything they thought about Margaret's outburst. Laura, who had been sitting a few rows behind me, came up and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Rebecca," she said softly, her voice steady, Your mom saw you for who you are. She knew you were the one who stood by her, no matter what." I nodded, my throat tight. Mom's letter had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I had spent so much time protecting her, trying to shield her from the truth, and yet she had known all along. And even in her final days, she had chosen to protect me instead. As the service ended and people began to file out, many stopped to offer me condolences, their words laced with a newfound respect. Margaret's mask had finally slipped, and the truth was out. I wasn't sure what would happen next, for her, for George, or for me. But one thing was certain. Mom's voice, even in death, had given me a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. That night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, I looked at the picture of Mom I had taken from the service. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching it close to my chest. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest glimmer of peace. Mom's love had been bigger than Margaret's betrayal, and in the end, that love was all I needed to carry me forward. "Don't you dare! You're not going to try to steal your sister's credit," my mom yelled, her voice echoing through the living room. I sat there stunned, my face burning of rage. It was Christmas Eve at my parents' house. Just me, my sister Olivia, who was out getting candy, our parents, and my cousin Nina. The tree was lit up, the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the room, and yet all I could feel was the weight of their judgment crushing me. My name is Sophie, I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the afterthought in my own family. My sister Olivia, the golden child, could walk on water as far as my parents were concerned. Meanwhile, I couldn't even breathe without them finding something to criticize. But this time, it wasn't just words, it was about the truth. Since July, I had been quietly sending my parents money every month to help with their bills, but Olivia had taken all the credit, and my parents believed her without question. When I finally tried to tell them the truth, my mom shut me down like I was some liar looking for attention. I didn't know what to say after that. My throat felt tight, and all the words I wanted to scream just stuck there. Nina, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. "Wait a second," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. "How do you even know Olivia's sending the money? Have you ever seen proof of it?" My parents looked at her like she had grown a second head. My dad waved his hand dismissively. "Of course Olivia wouldn't lie about something like that. She's been the responsible one since day one." Responsible. That word felt like a slap to my face. I'd spent the last 6 months tightening my own budget just to help them out, skipping dinners out with friends and saying no to things I really wanted. All because I thought it was the right thing to do. But no matter what I did, Olivia always managed to swoop in and make me look like the selfish one. Just as I was about to respond, the front door opened, and Olivia waltzed in, a bag of candy swinging from her hand. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice annoyingly cheerful, as if she hadn't just walked into the middle of a storm. She took one look at my mom's flushed face and my clenched fists and immediately put on her innocent act, tilting her head like she had no idea what was happening. "You need to explain to your sister," my mom said, pointing a shaky finger at me. "She's trying to claim she's been helping us financially when we all know it's been you." Olivia froze for a moment, her eyes darting to me, then to Nina, before putting on her most saccharine smile. "Oh, Mom," she said with a laugh, setting the candy on the counter. "I'm sure Sophie just misunderstood." She turned to me, her expression dripping with fake concern. "You know I've been handling this for months now. I didn't want to burden you with it." I stared at her, absolutely floored by her audacity. "Misunderstood?" I said, my voice trembling. "I've been sending them money since July, every single month, and you knew that, Olivia. Don't you dare act like this was all a mix-up." Nina crossed her arms, glaring at Olivia. "Yeah, Olivia. Care to explain why you've been so quiet about it all this time?" Olivia's fake smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly, brushing her hair behind her ear like nothing had happened. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I've been helping out because, unlike you, I actually care about Mom and Dad's well-being." That was it. I felt something snap inside me. "Are you serious right now?" I shot back, standing up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You've been letting them believe a lie for months, Olivia. You knew I was the one sending the money, but you just sat there and let them think it was you." "Why? So you could play the hero?" Nina stepped in before things got even more heated. "Hold on," she said, raising her hand like a referee. "There's an easy way to settle this. Did Olivia ever actually show you proof that she was sending the money? Bank statements, screenshots, anything?" My parents exchanged awkward glances, and my mom stammered, "Well, no, but we didn't think we needed to." Olivia said she was doing it. Olivia whipped around to face Nina, her smile now replaced with a glare. "You're out of place here, Nina," she snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. "This is a family matter, and frankly, you don't know the first thing about what's been going on." Nina didn't back down. "Oh, I think I know enough," she shot back, her tone icy. "I've watched you bask in the praise for something you didn't even do, Olivia. You've been feeding them lies, and you know it." Olivia let out a sarcastic laugh, shaking her head. "You're unbelievable," she muttered, pulling out her phone. "Fine, if you want proof, here." She scrolled through her files, then held the screen up to my parents. "See? These are the receipts for the transfers I've been making, every month like clockwork." My mom's face softened as she glanced at the PDFs, but I knew better. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "Let me see those," I said, snatching the phone from her hand before she could protest. The receipts looked convincing. Her name, the amounts, even the transaction IDs. But something about them felt off. I turned to Nina, who leaned over to look with me. "This is a lie!" I exploded, my voice shaking the walls. The room went dead silent, but I couldn't stop. "You faked these, Olivia. Don't act like you've been sending them money when you haven't sent a single dime." My chest heaved as I glared at her, daring her to deny it. I wasn't going to let her get away with this, not this time. Nina, who had been so sharp just moments ago, suddenly stepped back, looking uncomfortable. "I don't know. Maybe I went too far," she muttered, avoiding Olivia's glare. She wasn't going to take sides anymore, not with the tension this high. Olivia just smirked, holding her phone close to her chest like it was some kind of shield. "Fine," I snapped, pulling out my own phone. "You want proof? I'll show you my bank statements right now." My hands shook as I opened my banking app, only for the screen to freeze. "No," I muttered under my breath, tapping furiously. It wasn't working. I closed it, reopened it, and tried again. Nothing. "Come on," I hissed, panic rising in my chest. "It's not working." "How convenient," Olivia said smugly, her arms crossed. "The one time you need to prove something, your phone just doesn't work. Sounds legit, Sophie." "Enough," my dad roared, standing up and towering over me. "You've embarrassed yourself enough already. If you can't back up your story, you owe your sister an apology. Right now." His tone was cold, final. "And if you don't, you can pack your things and leave. I'm not letting you ruin Christmas with your jealousy." I froze, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. "Apologize? For what?" I spat, my voice cracking. "For telling the truth? For being tired of living in her shadow?" My dad just pointed to the door. "You have 5 minutes to decide." I didn't wait. I grabbed my coat and walked out into the freezing night, slamming the door behind me. Tears blurred my vision as I made my way to my car. I had never felt so small, so lost. Christmas was supposed to be about family, but all I could feel was how little I belonged in mine. I drove aimlessly through the dark, my tears blurring the Christmas lights strung along the streets. My mind was racing, replaying the confrontation over and over. How could Olivia do this? How could my parents believe her without a second thought? I didn't even realize where I was going until I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour coffee shop. The bright lights inside felt oddly out of place against the stillness of the night. I grabbed my phone and slid into a booth, still trembling with anger and humiliation. My banking app stared back at me, useless. Every time I tried to log in, I got the same frustrating message. We're experiencing a major technical issue. All services, including ATMs, are temporarily unavailable. We're working to resolve this as soon as possible. Thank you for your patience. Patience? I needed proof now. I refreshed the app again and again, as if sheer willpower could force it to work, but it was no use. The universe really had it out for me tonight. An hour passed. I was still staring at my phone, empty coffee cups scattered around me, when a message popped up. It was Nina. Hey, are you okay? I've been thinking, and if you need a place to crash, my door's open. I'm not sure what to believe right now, but you've always been honest with me. Let me know. For the first time that night, I let out a shaky breath. Nina believed me, or at least part of her did. She was torn, and I couldn't blame her. Olivia's so-called proof had been convincing enough, and with my app down, I had nothing but my word to fight back. Still, her message gave me a small glimmer of hope. At least someone wasn't completely against me. My parents lived in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else's business. I'd only come back for the holidays, hoping for a quiet Christmas with family. Instead, I found myself driving through empty streets to Nina's house, clutching the steering wheel as if it could hold me together. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already at the door, wrapped in a blanket and holding a mug of tea. "Come in," she said softly, her expression a mix of worry and hesitation. I stepped inside, and she didn't press me to talk right away. She just handed me a mug and led me to the couch, where I finally let out the breath I'd been holding since I walked out of my parents' house. "I'm not lying, Nina," I said after a few minutes of silence. My voice cracked, but I forced myself to keep going. "I swear to you, I've been sending them money every month since July. Olivia knew, and she let them think it was her. Those receipts she showed? They're fake. I know they are." Nina nodded slowly, still unsure. "I believe you," she said hesitantly, "but you have to admit, it doesn't look great right now, especially with the app not working. It's like the perfect storm." "I know," I whispered, my frustration boiling over. "But tomorrow, if the bank system is back up, I'll show them the proof. I'm not stepping foot in that house for Christmas Day unless I can prove Olivia's been lying." Nina sat back, looking thoughtful. "Everyone's going to be there tomorrow," she said quietly. "Your parents, Olivia, the whole family. If you walk in with proof, there's no way she can weasel her way out of it." "Exactly," I said firmly. "I'm not going to let her keep making me the bad guy. Not anymore." Nina gave me a small, encouraging smile. "Well, you can stay here as long as you need to. And tomorrow, let's hope the bank system is back up." The next morning, I woke up feeling a sliver of hope, thinking maybe, just maybe, the universe had decided to cut me some slack. But as I reached for my phone and opened the bank app, my stomach dropped. The same message stared back at me. "We're still experiencing a major technical issue. Services remain unavailable. Thank you for your patience." I groaned, running a hand through my messy hair. "Still down," I muttered, tossing the phone onto the bedside table. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing for alternatives. How was I supposed to prove anything without access to my account? Nina knocked softly on the door before peeking in. "Morning," she said, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Her face fell when she saw mine. "Still no luck?" I shook my head, taking the mug from her. "Nothing. I don't know what to do, Nina. I can't just walk in there with my word against Olivia's. They'll never believe me." She sat down beside me, tucking her legs under her. "There's got to be another way," she said, thinking out loud. Can you call your bank? Maybe they can verify the transfers over the phone? I considered it for a moment but knew it wouldn't work. Even if I called the bank, my parents weren't going to let me sit there on the phone in front of them. They'd just dismiss it as another excuse. Besides, it was Christmas Day and all the bank branches were closed. I tried calling their customer service line anyway, but all I got was an automated message. We are experiencing high call volumes due to a technical issue. Please try again later. I hung up, frustration boiling over. Everyone must have been calling for the same reason, and now I was completely stuck. I have to think of another way, I muttered, more to myself than to Nina. I can't just show up empty-handed. Sitting at Nina's kitchen table, staring blankly at my coffee cup, I felt completely stuck. Every option seemed like a dead end. There has to be a way, I mumbled, more to myself than to Nina, who was scrolling on her phone nearby. Something Olivia didn't think of when she faked those receipts. I picked up my phone for the 100th time, scrolling aimlessly through apps and emails, hoping for inspiration. That's when it hit me. The emails. Every time I made a transfer to my parents, I got an automatic confirmation email from the bank. Those wouldn't be tied to the app or the bank's current technical issues. I nearly dropped my phone as I scrambled to search my inbox. It didn't take long. There they were, clear as day. Monthly email confirmations from July through December, showing the exact amounts I'd transferred, and the same account numbers linked to my parents. "Nina!" I practically shouted, spinning my phone around for her to see. "Look at this, the emails, they're all here, it's all the proof I need." Relief and determination flooded through me at the same time. Nina's eyes widened as she read over the emails, her face breaking into a smile. "You've got her now," she said, her voice steady with confidence. "There's no way Olivia can talk her way out of this." I nodded, my resolve firm. "I'm going to that house, but only with this proof in hand. If she tries to deny it, I'll show them these emails right in front of everyone." For the first time in hours, I felt like I had control again. Olivia's lies were about to unravel, and this time, I wouldn't let her get away with it. As I stared at the confirmation emails, a wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a twinge of embarrassment. How had I not thought of this earlier? It was so obvious. But then again, I hadn't been thinking clearly since last night. I'd been too overwhelmed by the fight, the accusations, and the sheer humiliation of being called a liar in front of everyone. My mind had been spinning in 100 directions, and honestly, I was just trying to hold it together. "God," I muttered, shaking my head at myself. "I feel so stupid for not checking my email sooner. It's been sitting there this whole time." Nina reached over and squeezed my arm. "Don't beat yourself up," she said gently. "You've been through a lot in the past 24 hours. It's no wonder you didn't think of it right away. The important thing is that you found it now." Her reassurance helped ease some of the shame, though I still felt a little silly. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was coming next. "Okay," I said, sitting up straighter. "I've got the proof. I'm going over there and I'm setting the record straight. If they still don't believe me after this, then that's on them." Nina nodded, her expression firm. "I've got your back, Sophie. Let's go show them the truth." I pulled into my parents' driveway, gripping the steering wheel for a moment before stepping out. The sight of the house, decorated with twinkling lights and a cheerful wreath on the door, felt like a cruel joke. I wasn't here to celebrate. I was here to expose the truth. Nina gave me a small nod of encouragement before we both walked up to the door. My mom opened it, her face tight with disapproval. "So, you decided to come back," she said, her tone sharp enough to make me flinch. Behind her, Olivia was leaning casually against the wall, smirking. "Did you come to apologize, Sophie?" she asked, her voice dripping with mockery. My dad stood further back, arms crossed, looking like he'd rather slam the door in my face. "I just want to celebrate Christmas with the family," I said softly, forcing my voice to sound apologetic. I don't want any more drama." My mom narrowed her eyes but stepped aside to let me in. Olivia let out a little snort as I passed her, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "Took you long enough to come crawling back." I clenched my fist but kept my face neutral. Let her think I'd given up. Let them all think I was just here to grovel and move on. I played along, smiling faintly and staying out of the way as the house slowly filled with relatives. Cousins, aunts, uncles, they all greeted me warmly, none of them aware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. As we sat down for dinner, I felt my heart pounding in anticipation. I knew Olivia couldn't resist bringing up last night. It was only a matter of time before she used the moment to paint herself as the victim and me as the villain. All I had to do was wait and make sure my proof was ready. It didn't take long for Olivia to seize the spotlight. As we all sat around the table, passing dishes and exchanging polite conversation, she cleared her throat dramatically. "Well," she began, glancing at me with a smirk, "I think we all need to address the elephant in the room." The table went silent, all eyes turning toward her. She leaned back in her chair, feigning a look of concern. "You know, last night was really tough for me," she said, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. "I mean, I never thought Sophie could stoop so low as to accuse me of lying. It was honestly heartbreaking." My stomach twisted as whispers spread around the table. A few relatives were already glancing at me with disapproval, while others seemed too stunned to react. Olivia wasn't done. "I've always tried to be there for this family," she continued, laying it on thick. "Sending money every month to help Mom and Dad, never asking for recognition. And for her to turn around and call me a liar in front of everyone? It's beyond hurtful." Her performance was flawless, tears threatening to spill, voice shaking just enough to sound sincere. My parents nodded along, my mom looking particularly wounded. "You didn't deserve that, Olivia," she said, her voice firm. "We've always known you were the responsible one." The room filled with murmurs of agreement, and I felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. My cousins and aunts stared at me like I was the worst person in the world. I gripped my phone under the table, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had waited for this moment, but now that it was here, the pressure was suffocating. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands under the table as Olivia continued her act. When she finally paused, dabbing at her dry eyes with a napkin, I seized the moment. "That's enough," I said, my voice calm but firm. Every head turned to me, some with surprise, others with outright disdain. I stood, gripping my phone tightly. "You've had your chance to talk, Olivia. Now it's my turn." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, here we go again." I ignored her and addressed the table instead. "I've been sending Mom and Dad money every month since July. I don't use fancy speeches, and I don't ask for recognition. But when Olivia stood there last night, claiming she was the one doing it, I couldn't stay quiet, and now I can prove it." I held up my phone, showing the email confirmations I'd found. "These are my receipts. They come directly from my bank. They show every transfer I made to Mom and Dad's account, along with the exact dates and amounts." Olivia leaned back, smirking. "Oh, please," she said, waving me off. "Anyone can fake an email these days. You really expect everyone to believe that? My receipts came straight from the app." "They're not fake," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "And if you're so confident, let's check the dates. Mom, Dad, did you bother to check the transfer dates on Olivia's receipts last night? Because I'll bet they don't match mine." My parents exchanged uneasy glances. My dad shifted in his chair, scratching his chin. "We didn't check," he admitted. "We just assumed, and we don't use the bank app on our phones." "You just assumed she was telling the truth," I finished for him, my voice sharp. "You trusted her without a second thought, but now you have a chance to see for yourselves." I crossed my arms, daring Olivia to interrupt. "Let's go and check your ATM statements. They show the account numbers for every deposit. You don't need bank apps for that." Olivia's smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Fine," she snapped. "Let them check. I have nothing to hide." My parents hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It's Christmas," my mom said weakly. "Do we really have to—" "Yes," I interrupted, my voice unwavering. "We do." Reluctantly, my dad grabbed his coat and the three of us left for the nearest ATM. The cold night air bit at my skin as we drove in tense silence. At the ATM, my dad pulled out his card and accessed the transaction history. Slowly, he scrolled through the dates, matching them to the statements on my phone. The moment of truth came when he clicked into the details of a July deposit. It displayed the bank account number, and it matched mine. He checked August, September. Every single one lined up perfectly with the emails I'd shown them. My mom stared at the screen, her face pale. "It's Sophie's account," she whispered, barely audible. "Every one of these transfers came from Sophie. Olivia actually took the time to fake her statements just in case we would ask one day." When we pulled back into the driveway, the atmosphere in the car was thick with tension. My parents hadn't said a word the entire ride home, their faces a mix of shame and disbelief. As we walked into the house, the murmurs of conversation in the living room came to an abrupt halt. All eyes turned toward us, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone. And then, we saw Olivia. She was by the door, furiously throwing on her coat and clutching her purse. Her face was flushed, her confident smirk replaced by a panicked, guilty expression. "Olivia," my dad said firmly, stepping forward, "we checked the statements. Every transfer came from Sophie's account. You've been lying to us." The room erupted into hushed gasps. A few relatives exchanged awkward glances, clearly embarrassed to have believed her. One by one, they started gathering their things, mumbling hurried goodbyes as they shuffled toward the door. Olivia's facade finally cracked. She let out a bitter laugh, tears streaming down her face. "Fine," she snapped, spinning around to face us. "Yes, I lied, okay? Is that what you want to hear? I lied." She glared at me, her voice trembling with frustration. "You told me back in July that you didn't want a big deal made about sending them money, that you just wanted to help quietly. So I thought, what's the harm in letting them think it was me? They already see me as the responsible one anyway." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I told you because I trusted you," I said, my voice shaking. "I thought maybe, for once, you'd support me. Instead, you used it to make yourself look good while I was left feeling invisible. Do you even realize how humiliating this has been for me?" Olivia's expression softened for a brief moment, but she quickly turned defensive again. "They were never going to believe you over me, Sophie," she said bitterly. I didn't think it would blow up like this." My mom stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Why, Olivia? Why would you do this? We would have been grateful to either of you for helping. There was no reason for this." Olivia didn't respond. She grabbed her keys and stormed out the door, slamming it behind her. The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of her actions sinking in. My parents turned to me, their faces filled with regret. "Sophie," my dad began, his voice heavy, "we owe you an apology, a huge one. We should have listened to you, but we didn't. And we're sorry." My mom nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We've treated you unfairly for so long, and this was inexcusable. I don't know if we can ever make it up to you, but we'll try. I promise." I stood there, taking in their words, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to forgive them, but another part still ached from years of being overlooked. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, my voice quiet. "But this doesn't erase everything. It's going to take time." They nodded solemnly, and for the first time, I felt like they truly understood. The night ended quietly after that, with the house emptied of guests and the three of us sitting in the lingering aftermath. It wasn't the Christmas I had hoped for, but at least for once, the truth was out, and I wasn't the bad guy anymore. $200,000 for one night, he said. I couldn't believe it. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, clutching the towel wrapped around me like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. My stepdad, Adam, was standing a few feet away from me in the hallway, his eyes locking onto mine with this disgusting mix of confidence and desperation. It was like he had rehearsed this moment. I was too shocked to speak at first, but when I did, it came out as a yell, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and pure disgust. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I screamed, backing away as fast as I could. "My name's Michelle. I'm 33 now, married, with 2 kids, and thankfully a far cry from the version of myself that was standing there in that hallway. At the time, I was 25, fresh out of college, and drowning in debt from student loans. I was working as an assistant professor at a community college, trying to make a name for myself while scraping by on barely enough to pay my bills. My dad had moved to a different country when I was a teenager and had basically disappeared from our lives. My mom, Julia, had married Adam when I was 20, and let's just say, he wasn't the kind of person I'd have ever willingly chosen to have in my life. But my mom adored him, or at least she pretended to. He was 45 years old, wealthy, and provided her with everything she wanted. My mom was a bit older than him. It all started that afternoon. I was spending the weekend at my mom's house, something I rarely did because, honestly, being around her wasn't easy. My mom, Julia, and I never had a great relationship, especially after my twin sister died when we were kids. But with money being so tight, I figured staying with her for a couple of days would save me the cost of groceries, and maybe we could actually have a decent conversation for once. That day, I'd gone out for a jog. It was brutally hot, and by the time I got back, I was drenched in sweat. I saw a note on the kitchen counter saying that my mom was out visiting a friend and Adam had gone grocery shopping. Perfect. I thought I had the place to myself for a little bit, so I headed straight for the shower, not even bothering to grab clothes since I figured no one would be back for a couple of hours. After my shower, I wrapped myself in a towel and headed toward the bedroom where I'd left my clothes. It didn't even cross my mind that someone might have come back early. I mean, why would it? But as soon as I turned the corner, there he was, Adam, standing at the end of the hallway. My heart dropped. He wasn't supposed to be there, and the way he looked at me, it wasn't normal. At first, I thought maybe I'd startled him, or maybe he'd startled me. But then he smiled. Not a friendly stepdad kind of smile. This was something else entirely. Before I could say anything, he stepped closer. Too close. "You're beautiful, you know that," he said, his voice low, like he was testing the waters. I froze, not sure what to do or say. My brain was screaming at me to move, to get out of there, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. Then he said it, the offer that made my stomach turn. $200,000 for one night, he said, like he was offering me a business deal. His tone was calm, almost casual, like this was something normal to say to your stepdaughter. That's when it hit me. He wasn't joking. He meant it. Every disgusting word. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind was racing, but I couldn't form a single coherent thought. "What the hell did you just say?" I managed to choke out. My voice didn't even sound like my own. It was shaky, almost a whisper. Adam didn't flinch. He just kept looking at me with that disgusting smirk. "You heard me," he said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "Think about it, Michelle. 200 grand. You could pay off your loans, start fresh. No one would have to know." That's when the anger kicked in, boiling up so fast I could feel my hands trembling. "Are you insane?" I yelled, backing away from him. "What kind of person do you think I am?" He didn't move, didn't even look embarrassed. If anything, he seemed annoyed, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Calm down," he said, his voice still infuriatingly calm. "It's just an offer. You don't have to make a big deal out of it." A big deal? He was standing there trying to buy me, and he had the audacity to tell me to calm down? My whole body was shaking, and I couldn't even look at him anymore. I turned and ran straight into my room, slamming the door behind me and locking it. Once the door was locked, I pressed my back against it, trying to steady my breathing. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I felt trapped, not just in the room, but in the whole situation. What was I supposed to do? I wanted to scream, cry, throw something. But most of all, I wanted to be anywhere but there. The worst part was knowing I had no one to call. My mom? She'd never believe me. She never believed me about anything important. And this? She'd probably twist it into being my fault somehow, like she always did. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, trying to figure out what to do. Minutes dragged by, each one stretching out endlessly as I sat there in silence. Through the thin walls, I could hear the low murmur of the TV. Adam had made himself comfortable in the living room, as if nothing had happened. The audacity of it made me feel sick. Then finally the sound of the front door opening broke the tension. I heard my mom's voice, light and casual, like it was just another normal evening. For a moment, relief washed over me. She was home, but almost instantly a wave of dread followed. What was I supposed to say? Would she even listen? My hands were clammy as I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. There she was, setting her purse down on the counter, while Adam leaned back on the couch like he didn't have a care in the world. My stomach churned, but I swallowed hard and found my voice. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Alone." She turned to look at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone more impatient than concerned. My eyes flicked to Adam, who was watching us like this was some kind of show. I hated how calm he looked, like he already knew how this would play out. I gestured toward the kitchen, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we just talk in private?" My mom sighed but followed me into the kitchen. I could feel my hands trembling as I leaned against the counter, trying to find the right words. "Mom," I started, my voice cracking. Adam said something to me. Something disgusting. Her face shifted, but not in the way I'd hoped. Instead of concern, there was annoyance. "What are you talking about?" she asked sharply. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to step off a cliff. "He offered me money, $200,000 to sleep with him." The words felt like acid coming out of my mouth. I expected shock, anger, something. But what I got instead made my heart drop. Her expression hardened, and she let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, for God's sake, Michelle, don't be ridiculous." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "I'm not lying," I said, my voice rising. "He said it, not long ago, in the hallway." But she wasn't listening. She was already shaking her head, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're unbelievable," she said. "I should have known you'd pull something like this. Always looking for attention, always trying to cause problems." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother dismissing me like I was some troublemaker making up lies. I felt tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. "I'm not lying," I repeated, louder this time, my voice shaking. She raised a hand to stop me, her expression cold and detached. "Enough, Michelle. Let's see what Adam has to say about this." She stormed back into the living room, and I followed, my heart pounding. Adam looked up from the couch as if we'd just interrupted his quiet evening. "Adam," my mom said sharply, her voice edged with anger. "Michelle just told me you said something completely inappropriate to her. She's claiming you offered her money for—" She hesitated, glancing at me with an icy glare. "For you know what?" She made a suggestive face, kind of embarrassed to say the words. Adam leaned back slightly, his expression shifting into one of exaggerated concern, like he was the one being wronged. "Julia, I don't know how to say this, but it's the opposite of what she's claiming," he said, shaking his head as if the mere suggestion was preposterous. "She came out of the bathroom in just a towel and, well, it felt like she was trying to get my attention." He glanced at me with a look of fake pity. "I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to upset you, but she's twisting the whole thing around now." My jaw dropped. "What?" I shouted, my voice breaking as I took a step forward. "That's not what happened, and you know it." But Adam kept his composure, holding his hands up in mock defense. I swear, Julia, I was going to let it go because I didn't think it was worth causing trouble, but I can't just sit here and let her make these accusations. He sounded calm, even reasonable, and that made my blood boil. I turned to my mom, desperate for her to see through his lies, but the look on her face made my stomach sink. She wasn't looking at him. She was glaring at me. My mom didn't say anything at first, but her glare said it all. She believed him. Of course, she did. Unbelievable, she muttered, shaking her head. You come into my house, and this is how you act? How dare you, Michelle? Her words hit me like a slap. I felt my face flush hot, my body trembling with frustration and anger. You're seriously taking his side? I yelled, my voice cracking. He's lying, Mom. He's lying to your face. But she wasn't listening. She turned to Adam and placed a hand on his shoulder like he was the victim. I'm so sorry you had to deal with this, she said, her tone dripping with sympathy. That was it. I couldn't take another second in that house. I turned and stormed toward the door, my hands shaking as I grabbed my bag. You know what? Forget it, I said, my voice trembling. Believe whatever you want, but I'm done. I didn't wait for her to respond. I just walked away, tears blurring my vision as I picked up what I had brought, walked towards the front door. I could barely breathe, the weight of betrayal and anger pressing down on my chest. As I reached the front door, I heard her voice behind me, cold and sharp. I didn't expect much from you, Michelle, but I never thought you were a... She started, but she couldn't finish the word. I spun around, my hand still gripping the door handle. Don't you dare, I said, my voice low but shaking with anger. My eyes burned as I stared at her, feeling every ounce of the hurt and betrayal welling up inside me. You want to believe him? Fine. But don't you ever call me that. She stood there, her arms crossed, her face hard, and for a second, I thought she might actually say it. But she didn't. Instead, she just turned away, dismissing me like I was nothing. I opened the door, stepped outside, and slammed it behind me as hard as I could. I could feel the tears starting to fall again, but I refused to let her see them. Not her, not Adam, not anyone in that house. I practically ran to my car, threw my bag into the passenger seat, and climbed in, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I drove aimlessly for a few minutes, the streets blurring through my tears. The anger and humiliation were too much to hold back. Finally, I pulled over to the side of the road, parked the car, and let it all out. My hands gripped the steering wheel as sobs racked my body, the weight of everything crashing down on me. After a while, I wiped my face with my sleeve, trying to steady my breathing, but the knot in my chest wouldn't go away. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, but I didn't know who to call. My mom was out of the question, and there was no way I'd go to anyone who might twist this into gossip. Then I thought of John. He was just a good friend back then, someone I trusted. I hesitated for a moment, feeling embarrassed about what had happened, but I needed to get it out of me before it consumed me. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. It rang a few times before he answered, his voice calm and familiar. Michelle? Everything okay? He asked, immediately sensing something was off. That was all it took for the tears to start again. John? I said, my voice cracking. I need to talk to someone. Can I just tell you what happened? I braced myself for his reaction, not knowing if he'd judge me or think I was overreacting. But I didn't care. I just needed to let it out. John and I weren't anything more than friends back then. Good friends, but nothing romantic. We'd met at the community college where I worked. He was one of those people who always seemed easy to talk to, the kind of guy who'd crack a joke at the right moment to lighten the mood or offer a listening ear when you needed one. Over the months, we'd grabbed coffee a few times, and I always felt comfortable around him. He never pushed, never judged. Just a good, solid friend. That's why, even though I felt humiliated and raw, I dialed his number. He was one of the few people I trusted to listen without twisting things around or making me feel worse. As the phone rang, Part of me worried I was dumping too much on him, but the moment he answered, I knew I'd made the right choice. His voice was calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos I was feeling. "Hey, Michelle," he said. "What's going on? You sound upset." John suggested we meet at a park nearby. I think he could tell from my voice that I needed to get out, to talk face to face with someone who wouldn't make me feel small. I drove there, still trying to collect myself, though my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. When I arrived, I spotted him sitting on a bench under one of the big oak trees, his usual easygoing expression replaced by one of quiet concern. As I approached, he stood up and gave me a small smile. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "You okay?" I shook my head, biting my lip to keep from breaking down again. We sat on the bench, and for a moment I just stared at the ground, trying to find the words. Finally, I took a deep breath and told him everything, about Adam, his disgusting offer, and how my mom not only didn't believe me, but turned it all around on me. As the words spilled out, I felt a mix of anger and relief, like I was finally letting go of a weight I'd been carrying all night. When I finished, I looked up at John, half expecting him to have the same doubtful expression my mom had given me. Instead, his face was filled with quiet anger. Not at me, but at the situation, at Adam. "Michelle," he said firmly, his voice steady, "I believe you. Every word." Hearing those words felt like the ground beneath me had finally steadied, even if just for a moment. I let out a shaky breath, and tears welled up again, not from sadness this time, but from relief. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't have to deal with this. What he did, it's disgusting. And your mom? She should have had your back, no question." His words felt like a balm on an open wound. For the first time all day, I didn't feel completely alone. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts, but everything came pouring out before I could stop it. "You know, it's not just this," I said, my voice trembling. "My mom, she's always been cold with me, ever since Lily." I paused, swallowing hard. "Ever since my sister died. I was 7, and we were at the playground. She chased after a ball, ran into the street, and..." My words trailed off as the memory hit me like a wave. The screech of tires, the screams, it all came rushing back. John didn't say anything, just nodded, letting me get it out. "It was an accident," I continued, my voice cracking. "But it's like my mom never saw it that way. After that day, everything changed. She stopped looking at me the same, stopped hugging me, she just shut me out. And now, tonight, it's like she's blaming me all over again, like I'm the bad one, like I did something wrong. I don't know why I even thought she'd believe me." Tears rolled down my cheeks, and I quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by how much I was unraveling. The next few days were a blur of anger, hurt, and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake Adam's smug expression, the way he twisted everything to make me look like the villain. And my mom, the way she defended him without hesitation, cut deeper than I expected. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't let him get away with it, not when I knew the truth. I needed proof. Something my mom couldn't deny. Something that would finally force her to see him for what he was. The idea hit me one night as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. My phone. I could use my phone to record him. It was simple, and I always had it on me. The thought made my pulse quicken. If I could get Adam to repeat what he said, or even hint at it, I'd finally have proof. Something my mom couldn't brush off or twist against me. I decided the best way to catch Adam off guard was to play along, to make him think I was reconsidering everything. It made my stomach turn just thinking about it, but I knew this was the only way to get him to admit the truth. That evening, I called him, keeping my voice steady, as if I was genuinely conflicted. "Adam, I've been thinking about what happened the other day," I said, forcing a hesitant tone. "Maybe we should meet somewhere quiet to talk. I feel like maybe we misunderstood each other. There was a pause on the other end, and I held my breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he said, "Well, I'm glad you're being reasonable about it, Michelle. Where do you want to meet?" His voice had that same smug undertone that made my skin crawl, but I stayed calm. "There's a park nearby," I suggested. "It's quiet, and we won't be interrupted." He agreed without hesitation, and I hung up, immediately opening the voice recorder app on my phone. I rehearsed what I'd say, trying to keep the anger in check. This was my chance to expose him, and I wasn't going to mess it up. As soon as I saw Adam walking toward the bench where I was waiting, I discreetly started the recording app on my phone, keeping it hidden in my jacket pocket. My hands were clammy, but I reminded myself to stay calm. I had to make this believable. I stood up as he approached, forcing a small, nervous smile. "Hey, Adam," I said, keeping my voice soft. "Thanks for meeting me. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I wanted to apologize if I misunderstood anything." He smiled, that same irritatingly smug expression he always wore when he thought he was in control. "I appreciate that, Michelle," he said, sitting down on the bench beside me. "I knew you'd come around eventually. Sometimes emotions get the better of us, you know?" I nodded, pretending to agree. "Yeah, maybe I overreacted. I mean, I was shocked, and I probably didn't handle things the way I should have." I paused, glancing at him. I need to understand. What did you mean when you said what you said? About the money?" His expression shifted slightly, like he was weighing how much to say. "Look," he began, leaning forward. "I only brought it up because I thought we had a certain understanding. You're a smart, beautiful woman, Michelle. I thought maybe you'd see the opportunity for what it was." I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. "But $200,000? That's a lot of money, Adam. Why would you even offer something like that? What were you expecting from me?" He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "I wasn't expecting anything, really. I was just testing the waters, seeing if maybe you'd consider it. I mean, you're struggling, right? I thought it might help us both." I felt my stomach turn, but I kept my face neutral. "Help us both how?" I pressed, my voice quiet but steady. He smirked, leaning back on the bench. "Let's not play games, Michelle. You know exactly what I meant. I didn't think you'd make such a big deal out of it. It's not like anyone else had to know." I nodded slowly, letting the silence hang for a moment before speaking again. "So, you were serious? About the 200,000? He shrugged casually. "Of course I was. I don't say things I don't mean, Michelle. I figured you'd appreciate the gesture." Every word he said made my blood boil, but I stayed calm, knowing the recorder was picking up everything. I glanced at him one last time, my voice soft but firm. "Thanks for clearing that up, Adam. I needed to hear it from you." I forced myself to smile faintly, looking down at my hands as if I was embarrassed. "I mean, you're not wrong, Adam," I said hesitantly, my voice low. "I am struggling. Money's been tight, and with my loans, I've felt like I'm drowning most days." I glanced at him, catching the faint glimmer of excitement in his eyes as he shifted slightly closer. "You don't have to feel bad about that," he said, his tone softening in a way that almost sounded comforting, but I knew better. "You're a smart girl, Michelle. You've got options, and I'm offering you something that could change your life. It's not just about the money. It's about making things easier for both of us." I nodded slowly, pretending to mull it over. "It's just... I don't know. I've never thought about anything like this before. I mean, it's not like you're unattractive or anything," I added, forcing a nervous laugh as if I were embarrassed to admit it. "You're actually pretty good looking, Adam." His smile widened, and he sat up straighter, clearly encouraged. "Well, thank you," he said, his voice taking on a more confident tone. "See? It doesn't have to be awkward. I knew you'd understand eventually. This could be something good for both of us, Michelle. You just have to let yourself see it that way." I glanced at him again, feigning uncertainty. Maybe you're right. I just need some time to think about it, I said, standing up slowly. Can I let you know in a couple of days? I just need to wrap my head around everything. Of course, he said, smiling broadly now. Take all the time you need. I'm glad we could talk this through. I nodded, offering him a weak smile before turning and walking away, my phone still recording in my pocket. My hands were trembling, but not from nervousness anymore. I had him. Every disgusting word was captured, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. 2 days later, I called Adam. My stomach churned as I dialed his number, but I reminded myself that this was all part of the plan. He picked up on the second ring, sounding eager like he'd been waiting for this call. Michelle, he said smoothly. I was hoping to hear from you. Have you had time to think? I hesitated for effect, then replied, Yeah, I've been thinking. I'm ready to talk more about it. But I'd like to meet somewhere private, Somewhere out of the way. I heard the excitement in his voice as he responded. Of course. Tell me where and when. I'd already decided on the location, a fancy hotel downtown that Adam and my mom like to brag about. The Grand Regent, I said. Let's meet in the lobby tonight around 8. We can figure out the details there. He didn't hesitate, agreeing immediately. Perfect, he said. I'll see you tonight. When I hung up, I sat back and took a deep breath. Everything was in place. My phone was fully charged, and I'd already set up the recorder app to start with one tap. Tonight, Adam would think he'd won, but this time I wasn't walking away empty-handed. At 7:50, I called Adam, keeping my voice calm but a little rushed. Hey, I'm running a bit late, I told him. Traffic's a nightmare. Why don't you go ahead and wait for me in a suite? I'll meet you there as soon as I can. He didn't hesitate, clearly eager. No problem, Michelle. I'll let the reception staff know about you. After hanging up, I drove straight to my mom's house, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When she opened the door, her face immediately twisted with suspicion. What do you want? She asked, her tone sharp. I didn't waste time. Mom, you're coming with me, I said firmly. She started to argue, but I cut her off, my voice steady but full of emotion. If you don't come with me right now, I swear you'll never see me again. Not a call, not a visit, nothing. This is your one chance. Her eyes widened, and after a tense moment, she grabbed her purse and followed me to the car. When we arrived at the hotel, my heart was pounding, but I kept my composure. My mom sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, not saying a word. I parked the car and led her through the grand entrance of the hotel. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers, the kind of luxury Adam and my mom loved to flaunt. I walked straight to the reception desk, keeping my voice calm but firm. Hi, someone's waiting for me, but I don't know the room number. They said I should give you my name here. I told the receptionist my name. She nodded, typing quickly on her computer before picking up the phone to confirm. Yes, room 704, 7th floor. I turned to my mom, holding out the card. Let's go, I said, my voice steady. She didn't respond, but followed me into the elevator. The ride up felt like an eternity. When we reached the room, I took a deep breath before sliding the card into the door. The lock clicked and I pushed it open. Adam was sitting in an armchair, looking far too comfortable. He looked up, expecting me to be alone, but his expression quickly changed when he saw my mom standing behind me. His smile faltered, and he shot up from the chair. What's going on? He asked, his voice sharper than usual, his confidence suddenly wavering. I stepped into the room, my mom trailing behind me. Adam's face was a mix of confusion and panic as he glanced between us. What's going on, Michelle? He demanded, trying to keep his voice steady, but the cracks were already showing. I pulled out my phone, holding it tightly in my hand. I thought it was time we cleared up that little misunderstanding, Adam, I said, my voice cold. You remember, don't you? The conversation we had at the park 2 days ago? His eyes darted to my mom, then back to me. Michelle, I don't know what you're talking about, he said quickly. his usual smugness replaced by a nervous edge. "I think you're making a big mistake here." I smiled faintly, my hand trembling slightly as I tapped the play button on my phone. His voice filled the room, crystal clear. Every disgusting word he'd said at the park played back, his offers, his excuses, and, worst of all, his casual admission that he meant every word. My mom's face paled as the recording continued. She froze, her eyes wide as she stared at Adam. When the recording finished, I turned to my mom, my voice steady but full of emotion. "That's the man you defended, the one you chose to believe over me. Now tell me, Mom, am I still the liar here?" Adam started stammering, his face red with panic. "Julia, you know this is all being twisted. She set me up," he blurted, his voice rising in desperation. "You can't believe this. She's just trying to turn you against me." But my mom didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on me, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't find the words. Finally, she whispered, "Is this real, Michelle?" Her voice was barely audible, but there was no mistaking the crack in it. My mom and I didn't talk much on the drive home, but something shifted. For the first time in my life, I felt like she truly saw me. A week later, she filed for divorce, and Adam was out of our lives for good. She never saw him again, and neither did I. In the weeks that followed, my mom and I started talking more, and slowly, our relationship began to heal. She apologized, truly apologized, for not believing me, and for the way she had treated me over the years. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just the shadow of the daughter she'd lost. I was her daughter too, and she wanted me in her life. Looking back, that night changed everything. It forced me to stand up for myself in a way I never had before. It was hard, painful, and messy, but it also gave me my voice and my life back. My mom treats me with respect now, and though we'll never be perfect, we've found a way to move forward. As for me, going through all of that brought me closer to John. He was there for me through every step, checking in, supporting me, and never once doubting me. What started as a friendship grew into something more over time. By the time I turned 30, we were married, and now with Bobby and Emma, I have the family I always dreamed of. A family built on trust and love, something I once thought I'd never have.